across the UK, on DAB+, on YouTube, on your mobile, and on your side. This is Talk.
Well, a very good afternoon. This is Talk Drive. I'm Peter Cardwell. Thank you so much for your company. And if you're trying to get in touch with us via WhatsApp today, that's going to be a bit tricky because it's down at the moment. We'll keep you absolutely up to date on that, but I won't give out the WhatsApp number just today for voice notes because I don't want you sending one and then not getting through. But there are lots of ways you can discuss things with us, and I will make sure that I give out those numbers in a second. Zelenskyy is due in Washington very soon. The flags are out, the Marines are out, and we will see him arriving very, very soon. That's President Zelenskyy of Ukraine. Shuttle diplomacy, lots and lots of world leaders, including Starmer. Yesterday, we will, of course, reflect on that with Ryan Sabey, who's the Deputy Political Editor of The Sun. We know that Annalise Dodds, who was the aid minister, she has resigned over Keir Starmer's decision to cut the aid budget, and terror police are examining whether the BBC broke the law, possibly by paying Hamas. It's interesting that Lisa Nandy, the Culture Secretary, is asking the head of the BBC, did that actually happen? So there's quite a number of complaints there. Also, could the GP strike deal help end an 8 a.m. scramble for appointments? That is something we'll be looking into as well. We'll give you a sports update. There's an awful lot coming between now and 7 o'clock, possibly even a press conference between Donald Trump and President Zelenskyy, which will bring you some, if not all of. As always, I want your views on everything that's going on, especially Ukraine and everything that's going on there, and the BBC and their Gaza documentary. This scandal has gone on for another 2 weeks, and now terror police are looking into it. 0344 499 1000 is the number to call. You can text me 87222 with the word talk in your text. You can tweet me at talkTV or follow me at Peter Cardwell. We know that WhatsApps are down at the moment. I'll let you know when they're back up. We think it's coming back up soon. We'll let you know. But the main number, of course, is 0344 499 1000, and we will make sure that as soon as WhatsApp is back up, we'll let you know. But you can, of course, use that number to give me a ring. So Zelenskyy is on his way. We are waiting for Donald Trump to come out of the front door where he met, of course, Starmer yesterday. We can see, if you're watching, and for those who are listening on the radio, which is the majority of our viewers and listeners, well, we'll tell you what's happening. A number of people coming in, and the flags are being brought out there and unruffled, and making sure that those flags are absolutely as they should be. Of course, there's a problem yesterday at Blair House where Starmer was staying. The Union flag was upside down, whereas here I can confirm the Ukrainian flag is absolutely correct, and it's just being made absolutely perfect by a Marine there, or a uniformed officer of some kind. There are cameramen and various people awaiting Zelenskyy. The Stars and Stripes is there. No sign of Donald Trump just yet, but given the choreography yesterday, it should be very, very fast. And until that moment when Zelenskyy arrives, which I will, of course, bring to you live here on Talk Drive, let's speak to Ryan Sabey, who is Deputy Political Editor of The Sun. Ryan, great to have you with us. Certainly, let's just talk about the man who's about to arrive, which is Zelenskyy. There's an awful lot at stake here, isn't there, including a big minerals deal. What will he want out of his meetings with Donald Trump today?
I think one thing that afternoon, Peter, by the way, I think one thing that he'll be looking for is some kind of security guarantee. Now, that is the situation where they're going to be looking for a peace deal between Ukraine and Russia, but it has to come with some kind of backstop. Without a ceasefire and that guarantee, the ceasefire effectively is almost worthless. So I think that's where the main crux of the discussions between Donald Trump and Volodymyr Zelenskyy is going to come this afternoon. But also the big kind of announcement where I think we are going to get some meat on the bone really is on this minerals deal. And we heard the president yesterday talk about the minerals deal that's going to be struck between the US.
It may even be signed this afternoon in Washington as well. That's a possibility. We'll see what happens there. There'll be plenty of questions about that. But I wonder within that minerals deal whether there will be sort of effective security guarantees, because if Elon Musk has a new Tesla factory in Ukraine, or if there is a huge minerals deal, well, actually, of course, the security and the money flowing between Ukraine and the United States will be of prime interest to Donald Trump and many others.
Yeah, that's right. I think there's a couple of things at play here. There was some confusion in recent weeks because of the language that was coming out of the White House, whether the United States was still sticking to that Article 5 guarantee, the NATO Article 5 condition, which means they would effectively intervene if a fellow NATO country was being attacked. Now, I think Donald Trump was very, very clear about that last night, saying that he would. Now, on the back of that, when this minerals deal is signed, there will be effectively US workers in Ukraine actually digging for the minerals. And on the back of that, if an American worker or civilian does come under attack per se, it means that the US interests, or the US will then very much intervene if that was the case. So it seems that America, even though they may not have the troops or the hardware in place in Ukraine, they will very be much actually there in an emergency. And I think Donald Trump tried to make that point last night to Sir Keir Starmer, saying that Europe can look after itself, but if in the case of emergency, we will be there.
It's very interesting, some of the language and discussions that the two men have had previously, and some of the attitudes, of course, in the last week or so. Let's just remind ourselves what President Trump said about President Zelensky just last week.
Modestly successful comedian, President Zelensky talked the United States of America into spending $350 billion to go into a war that basically couldn't be won. He refuses to have elections, is low in the real Ukrainian polls. I mean, how can you be high with every city is being demolished? It's hard to be high. Somebody said, oh, no, his polls are good. Give me a break. A dictator without elections. Zelensky better move fast, or he's not going to have a country left. Got to move fast, because that war is going in the wrong direction. In the meantime, we're successfully negotiating an end to the war.
That was last Friday evening, and he very clearly called President Zelensky a dictator there. Well, they meet today. In fact, they're about to meet in a few minutes' time for the first time since Donald Trump made those comments. But of course, he said this yesterday with Keir Starmer.
Will you take the opportunity to apologise to him for calling him a dictator while praising Vladimir Putin, who is a dictator?
I think we're going to have a very good meeting tomorrow morning. We're going to get along really well, okay? We have a lot of respect. I have a lot of respect for him. We've given him a lot of equipment and a lot of money, but they have fought very bravely, no matter how you figure it. They have really fought. Somebody has to use that equipment, and they have been very brave in that sense.
Well, he denied as another part of that, press conference, actually calling Vladimir Zelensky a dictator, but clearly he did. It's a very interesting sort of mood music, very interesting atmosphere that this meeting takes place in, Ryan.
Yeah, I think one thing you always have to remember with Donald Trump, he is a deal maker, decades and decades of being in business. He is just there to negotiate the deal. How he talked about the deal, the trade deal with United Kingdom that he wants, and he talked about this deal with Ukraine, the sort of peace deal that he wanted. So I think every time that Donald Trump almost opens his mouth, he's there looking for a deal to be made. So I think sometimes you have to see it within that context. And as part of that Ukraine deal, he doesn't just want to ensure there's a truce between Russia and Ukraine. He wants to make sure there's something in it for America. There is something in it for America to grow, and something in it for people in America to actually feel better off financially with all those minerals. This is something that's been a big problem for America over recent decades. China has got into Africa and really sort of done very well when it comes to sewing up those minerals, and America's effectively been caught short over the past couple of decades, and this is in some way to try and make up for that.
Tell us about Keir Starmer, because he had what many people think is a fairly successful visit to Washington yesterday. Got a number of wins that can be I think, very clearly attached to that visit, but also a summit coming up in London on Sunday as well.
Yes, that's right. I think Downing Street extremely happy with how Sir Keir Starmer did while he was out in the White House yesterday. And I think one of the reasons for that is it's just the unpredictable nature of Donald Trump. So I think even when they were sitting in the Oval Office, there was a little bit of uncertainty about how that could go, and also with the press conference, you just don't know what Donald Trump.
He was very quiet. Starmer was very quiet in the Oval Office, wasn't he?
Yeah, no, and I think Donald Trump, he's on his home turf. He's going to take the lead, and I think any word can be taken, I wouldn't quite say out of context, but other people could run with it. So I think that Sir Keir just wanted to be very, very sure with everything he said, and he got off to a fantastic start, of course, when he presented that letter from the King. He waved that letter around. It was a fantastic prop to go in there, and you could just see the beaming president, how delighted he was to actually receive that. But I think on the political side, and the sort of diplomatic side, I think Sir Keir would be very, very happy with the words from Donald Trump on this potential trade deal, whether it's a narrow economic deal, whether it affects things like tech, artificial intelligence, life sciences, or whether it's a broader trade deal. I think the mood music coming out of America would be music to the ears of Downing Street, and actually the fact that they said that it would happen quickly is also a good sign. Now, when we say that a trade deal can be done quickly, it would probably mean it will be that sort of narrow, focused deal against something very broad, taking in issues such as agriculture, mainly because they are so complicated and so controversial. And we obviously, just very quickly, we had Wes Streeting saying this morning that the NHS was off the table in that deal. So that was an important point that ministers here wanted to make.
Yeah, it's interesting that, certainly. I wonder, just actually turning to UK politics, Annalise Dodds has resigned over Keir Starmer's decision to cut aid budget. Not exactly the most high-profile minister, but of course he has seen quite a number of ministers leaving his cabinet and also his wider ministerial team. How significant is this, do you think? And did she have any option but to go?
Yeah, I wouldn't say it was certainly not in crisis mode with this resignation. I think it's perhaps a minor headache for Sir Keir Starmer. He won't be losing any sleep over this resignation, but she didn't really have much choice, to my mind. Not only did Labour in their manifesto have a commitment to get overseas aid money back up to 0.7%, it actually been, the Conservatives took it down to 0.5%. And then to pay for the defence spending hike that Sir Keir Starmer brought in this week from 2027, to actually pay for that, it's been taken down to 0.3%. So her department almost was being decimated, and the sort of funding for that department was being torn apart. Now, she accepted that some cuts would have to be made to her department, but certainly not on the scale and the sort of lack of consultation that came with that. So, in effect, I think she really had little choice. But for Sir Keir Starmer, he just moves on. He's got this big summit in London on Sunday. 18 leaders from around Europe will be there. Zelenskyy will be going to Downing Street. So it's a big moment, and it follows on from the talks that Emmanuel Macron, the French president, had the other week, and it just tries to bring Europe together to try and find some sort of solution to guarantee the security of Europe. But it's another big moment for Sir Keir.
Yeah, it's very, very interesting, certainly. Quite a number of people getting in touch. It does seem that WhatsApp is back up and running, it should be said, to the relief of many, many people, and you can get in touch by WhatsApping us either a text message or a voice message. Remember, less than a minute if you would, and we'll play out as many of those as we can on air. 0344 499 1000. Ryan and I are waiting for Zelensky to arrive at the White House. We're looking at the door now that Keir Starmer went through yesterday. No sign of Donald Trump, no sign of President Zelensky, but we expect that to happen very, very soon. Just before you go, Ryan, terror police examining whether the BBC broke the law with the Gaza documentary. The government involved as well, the Culture Secretary Lisa Nandy demanding answers, as are the Conservatives and others.
Yeah, that's right. This seems to have dogged the BBC over the last 10 days or so. Lisa Nandy, the Culture Secretary, has actually called in BBC chiefs to speak to them today. As you say, the Met Police there. Now, we have spoken to the Met Police. It seems like they're not actively investigating this, but they're certainly looking into probably something like whether it's a scoping exercise or just looking at whether to take this.
They've had a number of complaints go to them. That's anyway, right. Certainly. Yeah,
no, exactly. So the Met Police have been sort of dragged into this. But again, it's another controversial moment for the BBC, and Tim Davie, the BBC Director General, will be speaking to MPs at the Select Committee on Tuesday. It's one of his regular appearances before the Select Committee. And they talk about all sorts of subjects, topical issues, and this will be front and centre of that.
Okay, Ryan, thank you very much indeed. We're going to take a break now and say thank you to Ryan, who's Deputy Political Editor of The Sun. Lots of people getting in touch as well, Leslie says. So Dodds is willing to resign over foreign aid, but happy to vote to cut pensioners' winter fuel payments. Seeing Starmer and Lammy cozying up to Trump after the abusive comments they've made against him was sickening. Steve says Starmer just looked like a kid at school sitting by the school bully, terrified. I hope the big boy doesn't know what he said about him behind his back. And Jane says, you've nailed it, Peter. Starmer was quiet. That is why Downing Street were pleased. Still no sign of Zelensky at the White House. As night follows day, he will arrive as we go to this break. Stay with us here on Talk.
They have looked at us. They do know we have problems. The shine has come off, and actually a bit like a sort of big cousin who's a bit more successful, who worries about the sort of, you know, wider family at large and wants them to be okay, who sort of has a pastoral, patriarchal role to play in the greater family. That's what America's doing now. It's looking over to Europe, it's looking over to the UK and saying, look, you're one of us. We're kind of all part of the same civilizational development that's been facing a crisis. Get your act together.
across the UK, on DAB+, on YouTube, on your mobile, and on your side. This is Talk.
Well, we're still monitoring the White House front door to see when President Zelensky is arriving. No sign of Donald Trump just yet. President Trump to welcome him, but it was actually in an answer to the BBC's Chris Mason yesterday, where he was asked, are you going to apologise, really, to Zelensky for calling him a dictator? And this is what Donald Trump said yesterday.
Do you still think that Mr. Zelensky is a dictator?
Did I say that? I can't believe I said that. Next question.
Did I say that? Can't believe I said that. Well, he did less than a week previously, so that was that. Anyway, we will continue to. Oh, Donald Trump is there. He is there in a red tie, awaiting President Zelensky, who will no doubt be here within moments. A Marine saluting both the President and indeed President Zelensky, who is coming round the driveway of the White House. It's so that now the car has pulled up. It looks very similar to the one that Keir Starmer was in yesterday, and Zelensky has got out. They're shaking hands, warmly touching each other on the arms there. The car is backing away. It has both the Stars and Stripes and the Ukrainian flag. Some journalists shouting questions. Let's see what we can hear. I can't hear very much really at all. Anyway, the two men have gone in to the White House. There will be a press conference between them a little bit later on, and we will of course bring that to you live here on Talk Drive, and we'll make sure that we get all the latest there, because there's an awful lot happening. But now President Zelensky in the White House, so we'll talk about other things just for the meantime, but we'll go back to Washington before too long, so stay with us here on Talk. Let's talk now about the BBC, because terror police are examining whether the BBC broke the law with a Gaza documentary, and this has really been a big controversy for a couple of weeks now, and a number of complaints have been made to the Metropolitan Police about it. There are questions and assurances that have attempted to have been sought, really, over whether the Hamas, the terrorist organisation in Gaza, actually received any licence fee payers' money. We know that this documentary costs about £400,000, and of course it's totally illegal to give money to proscribed organisations, of which Hamas is one. Lisa Nandy is the Culture Secretary. She met Tim Davie, the BBC Director General, earlier this week to seek guarantees that no money had been given to Hamas. And also there are many questions about a boy involved with this. In fact, he was the narrator of the documentary, and there was a sort of initial report given out by the BBC yesterday. There's a big proper inquiry that is going to happen by a man called Peter Johnson, who's also in charge of an inquiry into Russell Brand, which 19 months on has not reported. So I think there are questions about how long these things take. But the BBC said the review has identified serious flaws in the making of the programme. Some of these were made by the production company and some by the BBC. All of them are unacceptable. BBC News takes full responsibility for these and the impact that these have had on the corporation's reputation. We apologise for this. Nothing is more important than the trust our audiences have in our journalism. This incident has damaged that trust. Critics have said they're marking their own homework, but I actually think we can probably give the BBC actually some praise today. I haven't praised them on other days, but certainly today I think the fact that they've done this, they've come out, they've fronted it up, and they've said actually serious mistakes have been made and trust is at risk. Let's talk to Suzanne Franks, who is a former BBC broadcaster herself. She's also a professor of journalism at City University in London, and City University really is the gold standard of journalism training in this country. Suzanne, thank you for joining me this afternoon. What do you make of this?
I think it's a bad day for the BBC, unfortunately. I think that there was an absolute, straightforward, very, very serious error made here, and they need to do some due diligence now and see what went wrong.
So to me, I worked for the BBC for about 3 years. I have a lot of affection for the organisation. I'm not someone who wants to cancel my TV licence, although some of our viewers and listeners do and have, and they're entitled to their opinion and actions, of course, on that, who feel very, very annoyed that their licence fee, that many people feel they shouldn't have to pay, and that's a whole other argument, has gone on this. To me, and you're the expert, Suzanne, but to me there appear to be sort of two levels of mistakes here. One was a sort of very basic factual mistakes and things that weren't clear, And then there is the wider argument, which is arguably at least as important in regard to bias and where the BBC's line is. It's meant to be an impartial broadcaster on the Middle East. I just wonder, with those two kind of sides of the levels of mistakes here, where your view is in regard to that.
I don't think there's much to say from this particular episode for the much wider question, but there's a really serious question here about what went on in the commissioning, because how is it possible to commission something from an independent producer and for such terrible errors to have been made, and for whoever was commissioning and whoever was in the independent production company not to be aware of that. I mean, I think that really is
We understand this process of commissioning, but Suzanne, just for our viewers and listeners who perhaps don't work in the kind of areas that we have, perhaps you could just explain how it works when you have an independent production company, because of course there aren't BBC journalists in Gaza, for example, as there aren't for any other or many other organisations, because Israel and indeed Hamas don't let them in, so particularly Israel. So just talk us through that a little bit. How will this have been made?
Well, so this particular programme would have been made by a small company. He's quite a well-known and award-winning producer who set up his own small production company. So it's a pretty small enterprise, without the kind of necessarily the infrastructure maybe that you'd have in a bigger company, or if it was made within the BBC itself. But the point is, it's commissioned by the BBC, and the relationship then between the person who commissions it and says, look, you've got this amazing access, you've got this very clever idea to look at the lives of children and so on, and we'd like you to make that programme for us, but we will still have overall editorial control. So that's really kind of how this works, and we will pay you all the production costs and then production fee on top of that to make this program, because you have this great access and you've come to us with this very particular idea.
It's interesting that we now know, because the BBC has told us, that the production company themselves knew that the young boy's father was the Hamas, they say, official. I mean, Hamas are a terrorist organisation. And the fact is that the production company knew this, the BBC sought assurances on that, but didn't get them, and still the programme went ahead anyway. I mean, that's a big failure, isn't it?
Well, I like you, I'm very, very fond of the BBC, and it does a lot of fantastic things. And I don't often come on the airwaves to bash the BBC. But in this particular situation, I cannot understand how something in this area, where the Middle East is such a kind of, red flashing light.
It's controversial before you start.
Exactly. I mean, in my day, I was at the BBC some years ago before I was a professor of journalism. And in those days, it was Northern Ireland, because there was, countless bombs going off and terrorist incidents and whatnot. And anything that had the smell of Northern Ireland about it, or anything to do with Northern Ireland, we knew you had to be super, super careful. It had to go up the chain, down the chain. You had to get all sorts of assurances.
When I was at the BBC, anything to do with children as well, anything involving children, having children on the air, interviewing children, everything had to be age appropriate. You needed parental consent, you needed signed documents, things like that. And I mean, the BBC is coming down with process, editorial guidelines in a way that other media organisations that I've worked with don't have nearly the same levels of personnel and people involved with that. And there were so many things that I did that, the whole editorial policy compliance network, that I got things checked with and talked to about many, many controversial reports that I had done, including in Northern Ireland. Yet this just seems, it astonishes me. I know I'm slightly out of date in terms of my knowledge of the BBC, but it astonishes me how this kind of slipped through the net. That to me is the big question.
Yeah, no, again, anything with children, has got red flashing lights, and anything at the moment to do with the Middle East has got red flashing lights around it. So it's very odd that there wasn't more care taken, or more, absolute guarantees and assurances sought and given before anything. Yeah. Before anything happened.
Suzanne,
for example, using this boy as a narrator, even that is
by itself. No, I know what you mean. Suzanne, thank you. Suzanne Franks is a former BBC broadcaster. She's now a professor of journalism at City University in London, which is very much the gold standard of training for journalism in this country, not least because occasionally they have a guest lecturer called Peter Cardwell. Right then, let's talk more about this. Stephen Silverman is going to be with us in a second. He's Director of Investigations and Enforcement at the Campaign Against Anti-Semitism. We're going to talk to him in just a second. This is Talk Drive. I'm Peter Cardwell. We're on air between now and 7 o'clock. Plenty happening at the White House. We will probably get a press conference within our time between Donald Trump and President Zelensky. A lot at stake there. And it was actually during the press conference at the White House yesterday that Keir Starmer was asked about what we're talking about at the moment, which is the scandal engulfing the BBC. This is what he had to say. There was a slight problem with the clip there, but certainly the Keir Starmer addressed that scandal engulfing the BBC, and we'll bring you that clip when we can. Just a few gremlins in the system there. I want to talk to Stephen Silverman in just a second, but first of all, I just want to get a little bit of your reaction. And Michelle has got a really good point here on WhatsApp. WhatsApp is up and running again, by the way, so you can send me a text message on WhatsApp, or you can send me a voice message on WhatsApp 0344 499 1000. That outage is over now, it seems. Michelle says, we know the government have given money to UNRWA, which of course is the UN relief agency, and UNRWA are linked to Hamas. Will there be legal charges brought against the government too? Michelle, I think that's highly unlikely, but you raise a really, really good point there. And what is interesting is that there was a day this month that the government said that they were taking £17 million away from maths funding in this country to encourage children to learn maths and to learn maths well. And on the same day, they said they were giving £17 million to UNRWA, which is a part of the UN that only works in Gaza, and we know that it is riddled with Hamas terrorists. We know that there have been many times when Hamas terrorists have used identification, have used buildings, have used tunnels that have been under UNRWA buildings. The schools, that UNRWA schools there are teaching children in Gaza to hate Jewish people, to hate Israelis. It really is a scandal, and I've absolutely no idea why the UK government continues to fund UNRWA. But the question, of course, today is really about the BBC documentary. And Stephen Silverman is Director of Investigations and Enforcement at the Campaign Against Anti-Semitism. Stephen, what is your view of the BBC at the moment? Because I know we've spoken previously about so many times when the BBC has shown bias towards the Palestinian cause rather than the Israeli cause. But this is a sort of next level, really, as far as I can see.
Well, I don't think anyone should really be surprised by this, because the BBC over the last 16 months has been on a journey which has taken them from national treasure to a national embarrassment, which, when you look back at what has happened, almost seems inevitable. You know, I hope you'll forgive me for disagreeing with your comment earlier that you had some respect for them for their comment today and what they've said today. Now, that's just damage limitation. And yet again, as on so many occasions, when their biased coverage of this war that's been taking place for 16 months has shone through, they are marking their own homework.
At least, I suppose, they have fronted it up, even though it's taken them 2 weeks. They have said there are major problems here, huge mistakes have been made, and there is an inquiry. Like, I'm pretty much with you in that this absolutely should not have happened in the first place. And there were, I mean, I pointed out actually last week on my programmes that there were contradictory press statements that came out saying, oh, we full editorial control, and then the next day they threw the independent production company under the bus. Then they said, actually, it's something to do with me the next day. So clearly the response has been left wanting.
And the point is, this should not be an internal investigation. It needs an independent investigation, because all too often the BBC marks its own homework, and the mark says nothing to see here, move on. And the really important thing here is, as horrendous as this incident is to recognise that this is not the beginning and end of it. You know, if you look at what they did in this documentary, where they whitewashed the anti-Semitism of the people they interviewed on camera. So instead of saying Jews, the subtitles translated it to Israeli occupation forces.
That's correct.
And this goes back, if you go back to 2019 and the BBC documentary, One Day in Gaza, you had people saying on camera things like talking about slitting the throats of Jews. And again, that was translated as Israelis. This is an endemic problem that went into overdrive after October the 7th, 2023. And the BBC has increasingly looked like it is engaged in ideological activism rather than being committed to its principles of giving completely balanced explanations of events that are taking place.
It's interesting you mentioned how long these inquiries take. Now that internal BBC inquiry from a senior executive called Peter Johnson, well, goodness knows how long that will take. The Russell Brand inquiry was announced not just past August, but the August before that. So it's been 19 months and still no outcome of that inquiry. So I agree with you that that will take far too long. What do you think of what the government has done about this? Lisa Nandy, the Culture Secretary, the Prime Minister mentioned it yesterday in the Oval Office.
Well, as so often in matters relating to the conflict and to matters relating to anti-Semitism, fine words, but not enough firm action. You know, the government needs to demand an independent investigation. The taxpayer, you and I, through the license fee, have put money in the pockets of Hamas. And we have called for the Culture Secretary to suspend the license fee until we really get to the bottom here.
How can you be sure we've put money in the pockets of Hamas through the license fee?
Well, look, the money has been paid to the family of a senior Hamas official, and it appears to have been paid in a very contorted way, which also raises suspicions. You know, we can't rule out that further payments to Hamas haven't been made, and we just need to get to the bottom of this.
That, of course, would be illegal. Let's just remind ourselves what Keir Starmer said. I think that we now have this clip of what Keir Starmer said in the Oval Office yesterday about this.
Prime Minister, the BBC has today admitted serious flaws over the recent Gaza coverage, suggestions of payments made to people linked to Hamas. Does the BBC still have your trust? Thank you.
On the BBC, look, I've been concerned about the programme in question. The Secretary of State had a meeting with the BBC. I think it was yesterday, it could have been the day before. Thank you.
Does that give you any assurance, Stephen?
No, it doesn't. There was a meeting.
Yeah.
There have been lots of meetings about lots of issues, and we need action. Because right now, and if you really think about this, every time we get this biased reporting about events in the Middle East, it ratchets up the hatred against Israel, and therefore it ratchets up the hatred against Jews who refuse to disavow Israel. So effectively, the Jewish community, through the license fee, is being forced to make a financial contribution to the hatred that is being incited towards it. And it just has to stop. It has gone on for long enough.
I want to ask you about something else, and this is about the London School of Economics, a very prestigious university, which is hosting the launch of a new book called Understanding Hamas and Why That Matters, which claims that Hamas is subject to vilification. You have argued convincingly that it is an outrageous attempt to whitewash Hamas's barbaric acts of terror. This is, I just think, why on earth this is being hosted by the London School of Economics. The Centre's director says it was covered the LSE's commitment to academic freedom and free speech. Well, I would suggest that the London School of Economics is perfectly entitled to its own opinion. They're not entitled to their own facts. And the fact is that Hamas is a brutal, horrendous, murderous terrorist organisation. And I mean, we should understand Hamas, but we should understand how awful they are. And if they're trying to whitewash this by this book, that should not be anywhere near the London School of Economics. But what you've seen, Stephen, I think, and you're the expert, over such a long period of time, is many of our university campuses have such horrendous anti-Israeli, anti-Semitic sentiments, and that appears to be what is happening at the London School of Economics.
Look, we're seeing this, as you quite rightly say, this sort of thing isn't just happening at the LSE, although this is a particularly egregious example, but we're also seeing it in universities in other Western democracies. And it seems that what is happening is that people who have extremist views are either being sympathized with, or people are too frightened to stand up to them. And the result is that Jewish students at these universities are facing toxic, hostile environments, which can be violent as well. But it's also eroding the values that we all hold dear. This is affecting Jewish people today. Further down the line, it will affect a lot more people if it isn't dealt with now. And why there isn't just firmer action against this kind of abhorrent event is really inexplicable. And those who do have the ability to stop this and refuse to should feel thoroughly ashamed of themselves.
Yeah. Well, lots to discuss there, and certainly, I mean, if you're talking about free speech, it's not something Hamas have any interest in whatsoever. They're interested in one view only, and if you demur from that, death could be the result. Stephen, thank you. You're the Director of Investigations and Enforcement of the Campaign Against Anti-Semitism. That is Stephen Silverman there. We'll talk in just a second about a deal that's been struck to hopefully end the 8 o'clock scramble for appointments, and the NHS being not up for grabs in US trade talks. I don't think it ever was, but Wes Streeting has confirmed that. We'll speak to Roy Lilly, who's a former NHS Trust Chairman, in just a second. Stay with us here on Talk.
What is, to you, what does a Labour government mean?
They need to help people who support the country and people who put money into the country.
Yeah, I would agree.
But I think it's just the people who put money into the country, the taxpayers, we're just forgotten about now. I need to have a tooth removal. They want me to pay back £300. Where I got to pay my rent, I've got to pay for food, I've got to pay to feed my dogs, and I've got to feed my spiders. Why should I go to work every day in pain where I can't afford to help get treatment?
Across the UK, on DAB+, on your smart speaker, on your smart TV, and on your side. This is Talk.
Thank you to Graham, who says maybe Trump sent a WhatsApp message to Zelensky to say he was ready for the press conference, but with the outage, he hadn't received it yet. Mick says Lisa Nandy taking action against the BBC will be like a rabbit attacking a lettuce. William says, in my mind, I don't think Trump meant he was a dictator to Ukraine, but that he was a dictator to the Biden administration, hence the billions. Stephen Millings in Belfast says on Annalise Dodds, who has resigned over the big issue of aid funding being cut. Happy to stay on after our pensioners lose £300 allowance, but takes a hissy fit over our money going to nuclear-capable countries. What a hypocrite, says Stephen Millings. Stuart says Lammy is waiting for Trump to approve the Chagos deal, but surely Lammy can work out for himself it's a terrible deal. Trump will only assess it from the American point of view. It's not his job to stop Britain from damaging itself. And just one more before we go to our next story. Another Stuart says the BBC will do nothing regarding its biased Gaza reporting. An investigation will take months and it will say lessons will be learned. No one will be sacked and no one will be arrested if money has been paid to Hamas. Well, we'll see what happens there. We're going to monitor it very, very closely on this station. Fear not. Just say Kevin O'Sullivan is going to be here between 7 and 10 this evening in this studio for the whole 3 hours, because we're expecting that press conference between Zelensky and Donald Trump to be around 9 o'clock. We thought it was going to be a little bit earlier, but it's probably going to be around 9 o'clock now, a little bit later on. Let's talk about health, because GPs have now struck a deal to help end the 8 o'clock scramble. Anybody who tries to get a GP appointment on the NHS knows that you've got to ring up, usually 8 or 8:15, something like that, and you're very lucky if you do actually get an on-the-day appointment. Wes Streeting, the Health Secretary, has also said that the NHS is not up for grabs. He spoke about changes to the NHS a little bit earlier on today.
Will this solve all of the problems that have built up over the last 14 years all at once? Of course not. We're not out of the woods yet, but I hope the fact we are making this progress gives people a bit of confidence and optimism, especially given the cynicism about politics and politicians, which I can well understand. I hope it gives people that reassurance that we are delivering what we said we would, we are moving things in the right direction, and day by day, week by week, step by step, we are delivering the change that people voted for.
Well, that is Wes Streeting, the Health Secretary, speaking to the BBC a little bit earlier today. Let's talk to Roy Lilly now, who's a former NHS Trust Chairman. Roy, do you think these changes are going to work? Do you think people are going to be able to get GPs appointments in a more straightforward way and an easier way?
Peter, good afternoon. Not immediately, no. But I think it's a step in the right direction. The primary care has been running on empty. We get about 93% of first contacts in the NHS through primary care for less than 11% of the budget. In fact, it's gone down a bit since it was 11%. So, and they've all been hit with national insurance contributions and heating and lighting and inflation and what have you. 1 in 4 GP practices have closed. I mean, they've really gone through a bad period. This is a big chunk of money. A lot of it will just find its way back to the Treasury because it will pay things like national insurance contributions and tax and what have you. So I don't think it's going to make a huge difference immediately. What the plan is to get more GPs using the appointments on websites and stuff like that. Now, a lot of GP practices have got this already. It won't be news to any of our viewers or listeners. And they're probably doing it now, but a lot don't. So
yeah, there's an awful lot. I know my GP's practice, which is actually a very good one. You can't book an appointment online. You've got to ring them up, whether it's first thing in the morning or whether it's later in the day for a longer term appointment to do a sort of routine thing. And in a sense, that makes sense because you might have to change it or move it around or something. But that scramble is something a lot of people feel very aggrieved by, and it is a sort of survival of the fittest, which often you don't feel particularly like someone who wants to be the survival of the fittest when you're having a health problem at 8 o'clock in the morning.
No, you don't. And a lot of there's also a cloud telephony thing that GPs can have as well, and I think they're going to enhance the use of that, which is a much better switchboard arrangement, because a lot of GPs have got some pretty old-fashioned clunky switchboards. So, I mean, that's a good thing. There's also some changes in the rules around who GPs can hire. There was a time when there was a chunk of money when they could hire physios and pharmacists and OTs and people like that, but they couldn't hire GPs. They changed those arrangements temporarily and then they closed them off again. And we've all seen stories where there are GPs who are unemployed. There was a story in the press the other day about a GP who's an Uber driver. So we've had all that. The rules are going to change, so now they can use that chunk of money to employ GPs as well. So it's all welcome. But I'm afraid it's not a kind of press button and we'll see a big change on Monday.
Was there a worry that the NHS would be on the table during US-UK trade negotiations? Because I just don't think this was anything. It's a fair question to ask of Wes Streeting, should it be something that they discuss? But actually, I mean, there were so many allegations made against the Conservatives. They're going to sell off the NHS. There are going to be all sorts of American healthcare companies involved. They're going to, they're going to get rid of free at the point of use. I mean, the fact is there are a lot of private healthcare companies that are involved with the NHS already, yet it remains a socialistic system which is free at the point of use.
Yeah, I don't think the free at the point of use is going to change. And as you say, there are a lot of big companies, American companies over here. Centene is one of them that runs a huge number of our GP practices. So there's an American footprint here already. And to be honest, the margins in delivering healthcare here for the government are so slim that really I don't think anybody in their right mind is going to come in and do it. In fact, we've seen Virgin pull out. There's another company that's doing it, and most of the big companies that came in to try and deliver patient-facing care have gone. If you remember, there was a hospital that was given to the private sector to be run by the private sector. They actually paid £5 million to pull out of the deal, to buy their way out of the deal. So there's been a kind of lot of disaster stories with that. What I do think is interesting, and that's the data. Now, the NHS data is really very important. We've got lifetime data that goes back to 1948. We're the only country in the world that has this legacy long-term data. Now, that's very, very valuable to people who make pharmaceutical products, to health planners and so on. We haven't made much use of it, really, because we haven't had the tech and what have you to be able to do it. That's changing now, and I think that it would be possible for the NHS to offer our data, not identifiable data, let me say that, but data to companies like pharmaceutical companies, many of them who are American, to actually use that in their research. I mean, my data on its own is of no use at all. My data may be in your data, comparing and contrasting a younger man with an older man, that might be valuable. But like a load of old geezers' data like mine, a lot of us together could be really very useful to pharmaceutical companies that are working in that sector. That's very valuable. And there is talk now of the NHS being able to license the use of that data anonymized. I know to underline anonymized, otherwise people are going to bombard me with emails, but it's anonymized data. And that is very valuable. And you could say to a pharmaceutical company, for example, doing rheumatism, let's just say rheumatism, and they wanted some research around rheumatism of a cohort of patients, old geezers like me and my age and what have you. The NHS could pull that data, research it for them, and then sell that on to a pharmaceutical company.
Yeah.
Very valuable.
And that's certainly something that could happen. You're not old, by the way, Roy. You're classic. That is Roy Lilly there, who's a former NHS Trust chairman. Thank you to him. Lots of people getting in touch on this BBC story. Anne Starmer as well. Mick says the BBC investigation will not be the same police who investigated Jimmy Savile and now allow anti-Semitic marches every weekend in London. Don't hold your breath. Well, another person, Tony, says, can I refuse to pay my TV licence on the basis that I refuse to fund terrorist organisations? Surely that would stand up in court. It is illegal after all. And Jane says, is it just me or did anyone else think that when the Prime Minister passed Trump the King's letter, he looked as if he was going to kiss or hug Trump? I don't think that was necessarily going to happen anyway. But on that meeting, Dave has given us a ring from London, 0344 499 1000. Dave, what would you like to say?
Oh, hi, Peter.
Hi.
It was just an observation, really. It seems that everything Starmer does, he has to read from a piece of paper in front of him. He has no leadership qualities where he can sort of think on his feet.
You would think, I mean, I've noticed this quite a lot. He doesn't do it all the time, but certainly you would think that as someone who's a leading barrister, he was very good in court and so on and became the chief prosecutor of this country, you would imagine he could think on his feet perhaps a little bit better than he can.
Well, you kind of would have thought so, wouldn't you, with this sort of the criminal in the dock who's gone down a certain path. You think, but even his joke about Peter Mandelson, which was quite a good joke actually, the one where he was sort of saying, I'm over here and there's been a new leader in town.
Yeah.
But even that, he just read that off of a piece of paper. So even as a comedian, he's almost got to stand.
Well, it's all about comic timing as well. Do you think Trump is a better communicator?
Oh yeah, he everything about the American system is better, isn't it? I mean, I don't know if you've seen Caroline Leavitt, the new press secretary.
Yes, I have seen her. Yeah.
I mean, wow. She's got notes in front of her, but 90% of what she's talking off the top of her head.
She's a great communicator, and it's a very, very tough job. And she's only 27 as well. I mean, she's doing a fantastic job there and communicating. But very interesting points there from Dave in London. Thank you. Adrian says the police looking into the BBC. That's a waste of time. We all know nothing will come of it. No one will get fired or prosecuted. A fine, they will pay that out of our TV licence tax. Is a con to make it look as if something is being done. These people take the public for idiots. And Jane says, what does Wes Streeting say to people that don't have an app, digitally excluded, or don't want online everything for medical matters? It's a very, very good question. We'll continue to cover Zelensky, what's going on in America at the White House. We'll get your views as well. 0344 499 1000.
across the UK. On DAB+, on your smart speaker, on your smart TV, and on your side. This is Talk.
Good evening, this is Talk Drive. I'm Peter Cardwell. Thank you so much for your company. There's lots to talk about this Friday evening because President Zelenskyy is in the White House at the moment talking to President Trump. We expect a press conference from them in the next few hours. We'll bring that to you live here on Talk. There's a lot at stake as well, not just a minerals deal, but the security of Ukraine. Could there be an end to the war? Those discussions went on yesterday in Istanbul between representatives of the United States and Ukraine. United States and Russia, I should say, and how Ukraine actually involved themselves in that. Well, that no doubt will be part of the discussion today with President Trump. We'll hear more from him. He was with Starmer yesterday, of course, and we're going to talk to an analyst, a US political analyst, who's also a former senior advisor to Nancy Pelosi, the former Speaker of the House of Representatives, in just a minute. Plenty of political news here in the UK as well. Cabinet Minister resigning over Keir Starmer's decision to cut the aid budget, and GP striking a deal to stop the 8 o'clock scramble. We'll get all the sport as well this hour, and we'll talk about a number of other things, including prisoners who may have to earn release under radical Texas-style reforms. Let us know your thoughts. WhatsApp is back up and running right across the UK, which is great, which means you can send us voice notes, you can send us WhatsApp text messages. Keep them coming in between now and 7 when Kevin O'Sullivan takes over, and then you can send them to him. 0344 499 1000. That's the main number. You can give me a ring on that for a live discussion on the air. You can send me a WhatsApp text message or a WhatsApp voice message on that number. You can also text me 87222 with the word talk in your text, so it comes up on the screen in front of me. You can tweet me at talkTV or follow me at Peter Cardwell. Loads to discuss between now and 7. Stay with us here on Talk Drive. Well, I wonder what you're up to this Friday evening, whether you're one of the car dwellers heading home from work on Friday, whether you are someone sitting at home already listening to us or watching us. Remember, the home of common sense. You can listen on your DAB Plus radio or your smart speaker. You can watch us on YouTube or your connected device. 3/4 of homes now have a smart TV, and if you have a smart TV that gets the internet, you can watch us and see every guest in vision, see what they look like, and of course we'll keep you up to date on what's happening at the White House, and you can see it too. Lots of people getting in touch on GPs appointments. At our GP's appointment, they're only released once a week on a Tuesday, not daily. A once a week big scramble. How do you know if you're going to be ill on the Friday if it's a Tuesday? I mean, that's an interesting one. Penny says, I find it so upsetting, this hatred for Jewish people. What Hitler did was genocide and never to be forgiven or forgotten. Now it continues. It's appalling, says Penny in Essex. Dawn in Chelmsford says, during my career I used to do a lot of public speaking and also guest lectures at the University of East Anglia. I use bullet point notes or my memory. Surely Starmer could get some coaching, says Dawn in Chelmsford. That's about how Keir Starmer communicates, and certainly Donald Trump is someone who does nothing but communicate a lot of the time. He has said some interesting things about Vladimir Zelenskyy, the president of Ukraine, and indeed it was this day last week that he was giving a speech in Mar-a-Lago in Florida, and this is what he said about Vladimir Zelenskyy. It involves a particular word, dictator. Let's listen to this.
Modestly successful comedian, President Zelenskyy talked the United States of America into spending $350 billion to go into a war that basically couldn't be won. He refuses to have elections, is low in the real Ukrainian polls. I mean, how can you be high with every city is being demolished? It's hard to be high. Somebody said, oh no, his polls are good. Give me a break. A dictator without elections. Zelenskyy better move fast or he's not going to have a country left. Got to move fast because that war is going in the wrong direction. In the meantime, we're successfully negotiating an end to the war.
Well, a lot can change in a week. Someone once said a week is a long time in politics. And Presidents Trump and Zelenskyy are meeting as we speak. They're in the White House. We're expecting a press conference, possibly even within the next hour. But this is what Mr. Trump said yesterday. He was asked by the BBC's Chris Mason about the fact that he had called Zelenskyy a dictator.
Do you still think that Mr. Zelenskyy is a dictator?
Did I say that? I can't believe I said that. Next question.
I mean, he did. He did say it. He couldn't believe he said it, but he did, and it caused a massive furore. So very, very interesting way of deflecting that. Let's talk to Michael Yaki. He is a US political analyst. He's also a former senior advisor to the Congresswoman Nancy Pelosi. She was, of course, the Speaker of the House of Representatives and a Democrat. Michael, thank you for joining me today. There's an awful lot at stake here today. I just wonder, specifically on the dictator point, what you make of Donald Trump perhaps not remembering what he said a week previously.
Well, I have two theories on that. One is, if you listen to whenever Trump gives a speech from a teleprompter, his voice is completely different.
True.
It's softer. It's slower. It's as if he has no emotion in it whatsoever. I think this is someone for whom emotion is, and emotion, as we all know, triggers memory. I think he's so flat on these things, he may truly not remember, number one. Number two, if he doesn't remember for other reasons, that's a whole other issue that we should be concerned about. But I think that the fact is that when the BBC reporter asked about that and he said, what about that? I didn't say that. The fact is, with anything you look at with Donald Trump, is don't look at what he says, look at what he does. And look what happened earlier in the week with regard to the resolution in the UN about condemning the third anniversary of the Russian invasion of Ukraine, where we sided with our great allies, North Korea and Russia, against that resolution. That speaks more about where the administration is than Trump saying that he doesn't remember.
It's very interesting. It's very interesting you mentioned that, Michael, because I think I agree with. I don't agree with everything Nigel Farage says, the politician here in the UK. I'm sure you're familiar with, the leader of Reform UK, who said that, I mean, he disagrees with Trump on some things, but they're aligned on many others. And he said you need to take Donald Trump seriously, but not literally. And I wonder whether we, as journalists, pundits, commentators, are actually sometimes guilty of saying, well, this has been said, therefore we must react to that. And diplomatically, people react as well. And actually, because Donald Trump has a totally different type of politics, that actually, as you say, we should look at what he does, not what he says.
Exactly. So, I mean, whether it's the gutting of the USAID program, whether it's the vote at the UN on Ukraine, whether it's, after the meeting with the Prime Minister yesterday, where I think the Prime Minister, did a nice little, magic trick in terms of pulling out the invite from the King, which really goes to the core of who Donald Trump likes to think he is. He probably thinks that it's king versus king to king that he's going to be meeting with. But, those kind, you just don't know. You heard what he said, and there wasn't much to be said with regard to the aftermath of what the conversation was between the Prime Minister and President Trump. But what he does is how we're going to measure how successful that visit really was, and we won't know that for weeks or months in terms of the so-called trade deal that they're working on between the UK and the United States.
Well, tell me about the trade deal specifically on minerals with the Ukraine. How big an issue is this for the Trump administration? How are Democrats reacting to it? Because what I've picked up, although I'm sitting here in London, is that Democrats seem to have been slightly perhaps softening their line a little bit on this, and sometimes saying, actually, maybe we do need to get some resolution to what's happening in Ukraine, and perhaps we do need to find some financial benefit from the United States' involvement there.
Well, I think the details are going to be all that's what's really important in terms of this deal. Is this really going to be a reconstruction fund that essentially the United States has a majority control over, which is a lot different than saying, we just want your minerals, give them all to us, half of them, which is how this originally started. I mean, that sounded much more like a protection racket, right? You want my protection, you got to give me something right now.
Give me some zinc.
Give me some zinc, give me some titanium. I want some cobalt and lithium, on the table. And as you know, as other speakers have talked about on your show, mining for minerals is not like, oh, I'm just going to go scoop them and put them in a truck. These are zillion-dollar operations. No one knows how good these deposits really are. So in some ways, one could look at this as maybe a face-saving agreement between the United States and Zelensky, because for a number of things. One, I think the American people would like to see the fact that if in the future we're not continually having to pay for the destruction rebuild in Ukraine. I think that's where Democrats maybe are starting to soften on that a little bit. They weren't happy about the protection racket. An investment fund has a whole different character to it. How, of course, whether or not Elon Musk controls that investment fund, that would be an issue going forward. But I think that what Zelensky is in there right now, though, is saying, well, just because we have a joint interest in exploiting these minerals for the benefit of both our countries doesn't necessarily translate into a security guarantee. And that's sort of what the Prime Minister was saying yesterday. That's what Zelensky will be saying. And we're going to see how President Trump dances around that, because we all know the first questions coming out of that press conference are going to be about, is there a security guarantee for Ukraine as a result of this meeting and this deal today?
Let me just tell you a few lines coming out of the meeting between Zelensky and Trump. There is, some of the networks are running photographs, but we haven't so far heard what the two men have said to each other in the Oval Office. That's not carried live usually, as Michael, of course, you will know through experience, but some of our viewers and listeners may not know that. But Trump has said Putin wants to make a deal. He is also, he says Trump is in the middle and is for both Russia and Ukraine. Trump just wants to get a deal done, and he believes a very fair deal will be signed today in regard to a mineral deal. So what do you make of that, Michael?
Well, I think there probably will be a deal today. I think that the investment fund is a sort of nice middle ground between the extortion racket and what Zelensky would like. But still, embedded in this are two key principles. One, what kind of security guarantee is there for Ukraine? And two, is Ukraine going to have a place at the table in Saudi Arabia on these so-called peace negotiations? I mean, the idea that it's just Vladimir and Donald deciding to carve up the world is kind of reminiscent of the old bad days of the 1920s and the 1800s, when that's what the great powers did. That's not how it can work nowadays, and it's certainly not what Ukraine is looking for. I mean, I don't think for any doubt that Putin wants some resolution. He is losing tens of thousands of men on the front every day. He had to import North Koreans to help fight the battle. I mean, this is something that in terms of his standing in Russia, in terms of the loss of life, and quite frankly, the expenditure of materials that they've had to do is a huge drain on him. So he wants something, but what that is, we still don't know, and we won't know until. And Zelensky wants to know that too, which is why he wants to be in the meeting.
Thank you, Michael Yaki there. He is a US political analyst and former senior advisor to Congresswoman Nancy Pelosi. We have those pictures now we can show you of President Zelensky and President Trump in the Oval Office. Plenty of people around them, and various journalists and microphones and so on. We don't have the actual words that have been said just yet. But if you're looking on the screen, you can see the two men sitting together. Zelensky in the seat that President Trump in the seat he was in yesterday. Zelensky in the seat that Prime Minister Starmer was in yesterday. So the two men having a discussion there. And as soon as we can, we will bring you more detail of what has been said. But we know that Trump has said Putin wants to make a deal. He says he's in the middle and is for both Russia and Ukraine. He just wants to get a deal done, and Trump also believes a very fair deal can be signed today. David is in Exeter and has given me a ring. David, what would you like to say about the Trump meeting?
The Starmer revelation, really, of him using the strapline that J.D. Vance and Secretary of Defence Pete Hegseth has used over the last couple of weeks about European nations stepping up, I quote. And yesterday, Starmer used it several times. He said Britain is stepping up. And I think, obviously, politically, he can peg this off his very marginal increase in defence investment. However, and there are a couple of significant howevers, that he isn't really kidding the adversaries with what he's doing, because it would need so much more money than what he's talking about. And I think you've had some very esteemed military officers like General Lord Dannett on your channel saying that we would need to be up to, as far as Trump has said, 5%. So it's interesting because Trump had then said, you know, you're going to have to spend a lot more. That's great that you've done that, and you know, in his inimitable way. But you know, you're going to have to get to 5%.
Yeah, it's got to be more. Yeah.
And I think that's absolutely correct. But you were mentioning yesterday, I think that's the significant thing, that he's using their narrative and their straplining. He's mirroring them. But the biggest thing, I think, that, you know, if you just pan back from the couches in the Oval Office, you could see Jonathan Powell sat there on the couch, our national security advisor, so former top man for Tony Blair.
That's right, former chief of staff. Yeah.
Yeah, and you know, he's knee-deep in the Chagos deal and obviously heavily involved with all of the other bilateral and multilateral arrangements that John Healey is busily engaged in, you know, running around Europe trying to glue everyone together. But the thing is, you were saying about the conveyor belt of statespeople going through the Oval Office in the recent couple of weeks. Jonathan Powell was there a fortnight ago. And now he's back with the Prime Minister. So you can see what's actually gone on. They've gone over there with a tentative draft, you know.
Yeah, of course. And David Lammy has been around for a few days, and Morgan McSweeney, who is Starmer's chief of staff, was talking to Susie Weil as the chief of staff. I mean, that happens fairly frequently. But David, it's a really good point. Says David in Exeter there. And if you're watching, you can see, or perhaps you'll see these photographs later on, of Zelensky showing something to Donald Trump, a piece of paper, and that is photographs of prisoners of war. And Trump has told Zelensky he needs to compromise with Putin, and Trump says he's not taking sides, which is of course very, very different to the position of many European nations, including our own, who say and have said on numerous occasions that they're resolutely behind Ukraine. So to be a sort of neutral arbiter, to be a sort of chairman, essentially, is what Trump wants to do, which is very different, certainly, to what Joe Biden had. We know that. That's pretty obvious, but he said it, essentially, in terms today. G in Leeds says, Trump calling Zelensky a dictator is trivial compared with what our own government called Trump. That is a very, very good point. We will talk more about this as the programme continues, and indeed, if there is a press conference before the end of the programme, we will take it. We will let you know what both Presidents Zelensky and Trump have said. In a moment, we'll talk to Candace Holsworth about domestic politics, a lot of the stories of the day, and whether you can get an 8 a.m. Appointment, whether you can ring up at that point and get an appointment with your GP. Tracy's been in touch to say our GP surgery does not allow you to make appointments over the phone. We have to fill out a very long form online, and then you get a call from the surgery to tell you if you need a face-to-face or phone appointment. The form can only be filled out during surgery opening times, and also you can't fill it out between 1 and 2 p.m. as it's a lunch break. It's not a good service for the elderly or people who don't have mobiles or computers. Tracy, that sounds absolutely right. Also, people who have jobs working 9 to 5 who perhaps have their lunch break between 1 and 2, you would imagine that would be the absolutely optimum time to have communication with a GP to say, actually, I've got 5 minutes now, I've got my sandwich here, but I'm writing out why I'm feeling unwell. So if that's closed between 1 and 2, that's not a good thing either. Hopefully, Tracy, these systems can be worked out and we can all get a better health service, which we all pay for. Of course, we've got the highest taxation as a proportion of what the country makes for 80 years. Lots more to discuss. I want to get your voices on the air as well. 0344 499 1000 is the number to call. Let me know your thoughts and we will discuss all of it here on Talk between now and 7.
what is, to you, what does a Labour government mean?
They need to help people who support the country and people who put money into the country.
Yeah, I would agree.
But I think it's just the people who put money into the country, the taxpayers, we're just forgotten about now. I need to have a tooth removal. They want me to pay back £300. Where I got to pay my rent, I've got to pay for food, I've got to pay to feed my dogs, and I've got to feed my spiders. Why should I go to work every day in pain where I can't afford to help get treatment?
Across the UK, on DAB+, on your smart speaker, on your smart TV, and on your side. This is Talk.
Thanks to a number of people who've been in touch on Twitter, including Angela, who has said, I don't want my data harvested to anyone. That's why a lot of people deleted their NHS app. Data can be used against you, say by insurance companies. It's a big no from me. Another person says, does Zelensky not own a suit? Why is he not wearing a suit? And I think, and maybe Ryan, the producer, can check this behind the scenes, I am pretty sure that Zelensky said that he wasn't going to wear a suit. He was going to wear kind of military clothing until the war was over. I think that's correct in saying that to our tweeter, but we will check that and I will come back to you. In the meantime, let's just update you on what we know from the meeting between Zelensky and Trump. We haven't got moving pictures from it just yet, but when we do, we'll bring them to you. Zelensky has shown Trump prisoner of war photos, and Trump has told Zelensky he needs to compromise with Putin, as Trump himself says he's not taking sides. Trump has said Putin wants to make a deal, and says that he himself, Donald Trump, is in the middle and is for both Russia and Ukraine, very different, of course, from the United Kingdom's position and many European allies of Ukraine. Trump says he just wants to get a deal done and says a very fair deal will be signed today. This is specifically on the mineral deal that can be done. So we'll bring you the absolute latest when we have it, and of course the press conference that they have, we'll bring that to you live here on Talk, and if it bleeds into Kevin O'Sullivan's programme, which is between 7 and 10, they will do that as well. But in the meantime, I just want to talk about a few issues politically here in the UK. Annalise Dodds, who was the aid secretary, she has now resigned, or aid minister. She has now resigned over Keir Starmer's decision to cut the aid budget. There's a few things around, including Angela Rayner saying, whatever I achieve, people still say I'm thick. And GP striking his deal to help end those 8 a.m. scrambles for appointments. Lots to discuss with Candace Holdsworth, who's a writer and broadcaster. Candace, great to have you with us. Annalise Dodds, perhaps not a household name. She has been a frontline politician in the Labour Party for some time. How significant is it, do you think, that she has resigned? Do you think we should care about this?
I don't think it's hugely significant. I could imagine that there would be someone who would take issue with Starmer cutting the aid budget. From what I know from people within the Labour movement, the aid budget is really important. It's almost ideological for people, and they would see it as a return to austerity. But what I'm sensing right now in Labour is there's a real sort of pragmatism. People are realising that we're going to have to increase defence spending. We're going to probably have to increase spending on things like health. Something has got to go. And that is probably one of the things that the public will receive the best, because I've always noticed, and always in polls, it's always the thing that people question most. Why are we sending money abroad when, for instance, we can't afford to spend it on our NHS?
Yes, indeed, and a number of people questioning why Annalise Dodds and others, but particularly her, didn't resign over stopping winter fuel allowances of £300 to many people, yet the overseas aid bill was the one that she really thought that she would, the overseas aid cut is the one that she decided she would fall on her sword about. Very interesting interview with Angela Rayner in The Times, I think, and she says, whatever I achieve, people still say I'm thick. Just tell us about this, Candace.
Yeah, so this was actually a really interesting interview in The Times with Angela Rayner. It was with Keir Starmer's biographer, and he had this quite open chat with her about her political journey, where she is now, how she's found things governing as Deputy Prime Minister. I mean, it had been reported that there was quite a lot of tension between Keir Starmer and Angela Rayner, and he was maybe trying to marginalise her a little bit. And she actually said something very interesting in the interview. She said it was almost like an arranged marriage between the two of them, and they sort of had to get to know each other. And they have. And she claims that their relationship is very good. She talks about the background she came from. I mean, we know she came from a working class background. She had to leave school early. She had a child at a very young age. What they also don't talk about is, her mother had quite significant mental health difficulties as well. And you can sense with Angela Rayner that she is someone who's had to grow up quite quickly. I mean, she's my generation. She's not that much older than me, but I mean, she seems a lot older. She's achieved a lot for a woman her age. She's done very, very, very well. And she represents something you don't see in politics so much anymore these days, people who've risen up through the trade union movement. Because a lot of people said that about the modern Labour Party, that it just wasn't how it used to be. It has sort of been taken over by university graduates.
Yeah, and it's interesting with Angela Rayner. Do you think she's a good or bad politician, Candice? And do you think that a lot of the, she says whatever I achieve, people still say I'm thick. Is that to do with her background, her accent? Are people just snobs, do you think?
I think there is some of that. I mean, a lot of my family members come from the north, and I actually lived in the north as a child and had a northern accent. It's gone now because I lived in the north for many years. But it is something, people will look down on you for things like that. It absolutely is the case. I mean, my mother's told me that, or my relatives have told me that, when they were growing up in the 60s and 70s, you were just deemed thick if you had a northern accent. And I think there has been some change. I mean, you saw on television, you started having people more with regional accents. I mean, it's good that we have politicians who come from a variety of backgrounds as well.
And broadcasters,
so I think that absolutely
thank you, Eamon Holmes, I often say. There's a good story in this article about the bottle of whiskey. Can you tell us this story, Candice?
This is a crazy story. So it's funny. I laughed when I read it. Maybe that's just me. Maybe it's the sort of thing I would do. I don't know.
Wonderfully socially awkward.
But she said that she was in Keir Starmer's flat and he went out for 5 minutes, and she went into his drinks cabinet and took out some whiskey, and he came back in the room and she was like, "Oh, this is amazing. I love this." And he was like, "Oh, that was a present from my friend who passed away 4 years ago, and I didn't plan I didn't plan to drink it." And she said she was mortified, but he was really nice about it. The reaction to this story online has been quite mixed. I mean, people have been quite vicious, but I can imagine it is something that you would laugh about years later.
It's probably an honest mistake, but wonderfully awkward. To be a fly on the wall there. On a much more important aspect, there are lots of people getting in touch about this GP. It's the 8 a.m. scramble in Fiona in Aberdeenshire. This is just awful. She says, for the past year and a half, our GP practice based in Aberdeenshire, unless deemed a medical emergency, only offers a GP phone consultation 3 weeks later. Only after the phone consultation may it be decided a face-to-face consultation can go ahead. This 8 a.m. scramble is something that a lot of people deal with. In Wales, Ernie says we might be able to get a doctor's appointment finally in Wales soon, as the Welsh Government has announced it's recruiting 200 doctors and nurses from India. Now, that's the type of migration we need. Why hasn't it been done sooner? And I just worry that, we lionise the NHS. We said, oh, all doctors are amazing, all nurses are wonderful, they're angels, they're amazing people during COVID. Some of them were, some of them weren't. Some of them are lazy as sin. And like every profession, some are good, some are bad. I happen to have an absolutely brilliant GP in the NHS who is really excellent, but not everybody has that privilege. It's interesting in all of this, we're hearing just even a few anecdotal examples that many GPs, I think, used the pandemic as an excuse to see fewer patients, and that continues to this day.
Yes. And it broke people's trust as well, that, your doctor is someone who will always be there for you. They'll never hold you at arm's length. And I think for people I know who in particular had a very poor experience with maternity services and mental health services, I don't think they've ever recovered from that, actually. The 8 a.m. scramble is one of the worst user experiences in medicine I've ever come across. I don't know anywhere else in the world that does this. It's insane. I don't know how many people don't get things checked out because they don't have time at 8 o'clock in the morning, like you were saying earlier.
I'll tell you exactly what I did.
Appointment.
Yeah, I mean, I did the 8 a.m. scramble, or 8:15 more accurately, with my GP. I was lucky to get an appointment that day and was treated very, very well. But on the Sunday night, I had a friend, very good friend, who said, you have to go and see a GP tomorrow. You've got to do this. And I said, oh, I'll never get an appointment. And in fairness, I did. But it was 8:15 and I rang at exactly 8:15. I was number 39 in the queue. Miraculously, I got an appointment that day. But on the Sunday night, I looked up, right, what time do I have to ring? 8:15. What number do I have to ring? Got all the details. And simultaneously, I looked on Bupa and said, you know, I assumed I wasn't going to get a GP's appointment. And I looked up and saw it's £79. I am very privileged to be in the position where I could afford to pay £79 for a GP's appointment if I needed to. And I know there'll be a lot of people who won't have got appointments that day who will have said, I'm going to make the sacrifice, pay the 79 quid and go to a private provider. And that doesn't help the system at all. I can totally understand why people do it. It's a perfectly logical, reasonable thing to say my health comes first. But the fact is the NHS now relies on people like me doing that.
Yes, I mean, I think that that's well documented, that there's been a huge rise in private GPs. So they're doing very well. Loads more people are making those appointments. And, you know, we can't think about what it does for the NHS. Your health has to come first.
Yeah.
When it comes to your health, you have to ruthlessly prioritize yourself. It's really, really, really important. And I see that Amanda Pritchard has stepped down now as CEO of the NHS. Nothing bad was said about her, but many people questioned, you know, her tenure, and they said that if someone in the private sector had been running a business like this, they would have been forced to step down long ago. It's not just GP services. I mean, for me personally, I've been through the maternity system 3 times. It's truly appalling. I mean, there's been inquiry after inquiry after inquiry about just how bad it is. Another really terrible one is mental health services as well. There was a very disturbing story this week about a young girl who was a teenager, was sectioned. She had very severe suicidal ideation. So she was hospitalized, and she said that overnight, when all the doctors went home, it was bad. She said that people would be trying to do things and experiencing severe crisis, and there was nobody there to help them. And I think that anybody who's experienced an overnight stay at a hospital will say that. All the doctors are gone, there's no one there to help you.
Or weekends as well. And no, the system needs to change, it needs to reform, and hopefully those reforms will bring a better service. Candice, thank you. Always good to talk to you. Always a lot of common sense from Candice Holsworth, the writer and broadcaster there. I should say, on the Zelensky thing, I am apparently right. It's been checked. It was just in the back of my mind somewhere that Zelensky said that he wasn't going to wear a suit. He was going to wear kind of military clothing, military fatigues until the war in Ukraine is over. So that's why he wasn't wearing a suit, as someone was asking there. Jane says, perhaps if all these MPs are so upset with this foreign aid cut, they could send their own salary themselves to these causes. Well, I think that would make a huge difference, Jane. We're talking about billions of pounds, but nonetheless the principle is a fair one. And Damien in Hampshire wants to defend Donald Trump on the dictator comment. He says, I think Trump was implying if he didn't have an election then he would be a dictator for not having an election. Damien, I think that's fair enough, but nonetheless he used the word dictator to refer to Zelensky, and you know that's wrong. And also, if Zelensky's a dictator, what's Putin? That's my question. Anyway, well, agree with me, disagree with me, whatever you want to say. 0344 499 1000. We'll take some of your calls and more of your messages in just a minute here on Talk.
across the UK. On DAB+, on your smart speaker, on your smart TV, and on your side. This is Talk.
Well, the recording from the Oval Office of what President Trump and President Zelensky are discussing is coming through right now. Let's go to it.
Invaded Ukraine and destroyed.
That's actually the Vice President J.D. Vance who is talking right at the moment.
Prosperity is maybe engaging in diplomacy. We tried the pathway of Joe Biden of thumping our chest and pretending that the President of the United States' words mattered more than the President of the United States' actions. What makes America a good country is America engaging in diplomacy. That's what President Trump is doing.
Can I ask you?
Sure.
Yeah?
Yeah.
Okay. So he occupied our parts, big parts of Ukraine, part of East and Crimea. So he occupied it on 2014. So during a lot of years, so I'm not speaking about just Biden, but those time was Obama, then President Obama, then President Trump, then President Biden, now President Trump, and God bless, now President Trump will stop him. But during 2014, nobody stopped him. He just occupied and took. He killed people. You know what the contact line?
2015.
2014
2014.
and 2014.
2014.
Yeah. So
I was not here.
Yeah, but
that's exactly right.
Yes, but during 2014 till 2022, yeah, the situation the same. The people have been dying on the contact line. Nobody stopped him. You know that we had conversations with him, a lot of conversations, my bilateral conversation, and we signed with him, me, like a new president. In 2019, I signed with him the deal. I signed with him, Macron and Merkel, we signed ceasefire. Ceasefire. All of them told me that he will never go. We signed him with gas contract. Gas contract. Yes, but after that, he broken this ceasefire. He killed our people and he didn't exchange prisoners. We signed the exchange of prisoners, but he didn't do it. What kind of diplomacy, JD, you are speaking about? What do you mean?
I'm talking about the kind of diplomacy that's going to end the destruction of your country.
Yes, but if you
Mr. President, with respect, I think it's disrespectful for you to come into the Oval Office and try to litigate this in front of the American media. Right now, you guys are going around and forcing conscripts to the front lines because you have manpower problems. You should be thanking the President for trying to bring an end to this conflict.
Have you ever been to Ukraine that you say what problems we have?
I have been to.
Come once.
I've actually watched and seen the stories, and I know what happens is you bring people, you bring them on a propaganda tour, Mr. President. Do you disagree that you've had problems bringing people into your military? And do you think that it's respectful to come to the Oval Office of the United States of America and attack the administration that is trying to prevent the destruction of your country?
A lot of questions. Let's start from the beginning.
Sure.
First of all, during the war, everybody has problems, even you, but you have nice ocean and don't feel now, but you will feel it in the future. God bless.
You don't know that.
God bless. God bless. You will not have a war.
Don't tell us what we're going to feel. We're trying to solve a problem. Don't tell us what we're going to feel.
I'm not telling you.
Because you're in no position to dictate that.
That's exactly what you're doing.
You're in no position to dictate what we're going to feel. We're going to feel very good.
You will feel influence.
We're going to feel very good and very strong.
You will feel influence.
You're right now not in a very good position. You've allowed yourself to be in a very bad position, and he happens to be right about it.
From the very beginning of the war.
You're not in a good position. You don't have the cards right now. With us, you start having cards. Right now, you don't. You're playing cards. You're playing cards. You're gambling with the lives of millions of people. You're gambling with World War III. You're gambling with World War III. And what you're doing is very disrespectful to the country, this country, that's backed you far more than a lot of people said they should have.
Have you said thank you once? This entire meeting? No, in this entire meeting, have you said thank you? You went to Pennsylvania and campaigned for the opposition in October. Offer some words of appreciation for the United States of America and the president who's trying to save your country.
Please, you think that if you will speak very loudly about the war, you can...
He's not speaking loudly. He's not speaking loudly. Your country's in big trouble.
Can I
Wait a
answer?
minute. No,
Can
you've
I
done a lot
answer?
of talking. Your country is in big trouble.
I know.
You're not winning.
I know.
You're not winning this. You have a damn good chance of coming out okay because of us.
Mr. President, we are staying in our country, staying strong from the very beginning of the war. We've been alone, and we are thankful. I said thanks
You haven't
in
been
this
alone.
cabinet,
You
and
haven't
not
been
only
alone.
in this
We
cabinet.
gave you, through
I
this
said
stupid president, $350 billion.
You voted
we gave
for
you
your
military
president.
equipment,
You
and you
voted
men
for your
are brave,
president.
but they had to use our military.
What about
If you didn't have
You
our
invited
military
me-
equipment,
You invited
if
me
you
to
didn't
speak.
have our military equipment, this war would have been over in 2 weeks.
In 3
okay?
days, I heard it from Putin. In 3 days, this is something
Maybe
new.
less.
In 2 weeks, of course, yes.
It's going to be a very hard thing to do business like this.
Again,
I tell you.
just say thank you.
I said a lot of times to American people.
Accept that there are disagreements, and let's go litigate those disagreements rather than trying to fight it out in the American media when you're wrong. We know that you're wrong.
But you see, I think it's good for the American people to see what's going on.
I understand, sir.
I think it's
I
very
understand.
important. That's why I kept this going so long. You have to be thankful. You don't have the
I'm
cards.
thankful.
You're buried there. Your people are dying.
tell you
You're
again,
running
I
low
know.
on soldiers.
Don't-
Listen,
don't please,
you're running
Mr.
low on
President.
soldiers. It would be a damn good thing.
Mr.
And then
President.
then you tell us, I don't want a ceasefire. I don't want a ceasefire. I want to go and I wanted this. Look, if you could get a ceasefire right now, I tell you, you take it so the bullets stop flying and your men stop getting killed.
Of course, we want to stop the war.
But you're saying you don't want a ceasefire.
But I said to you,
I want a ceasefire.
with guarantees.
Because you'll get a ceasefire faster than an agreement.
Ask our people about ceasefire, what they think.
That wasn't
it doesn't
with
matter
me.
for you what
That
what
wasn't
this
with me.
means. It
That was
wasn't
with
you.
a guy named Biden who was not a smart person.
But this
That
is
was
your-
with,
this
that was
is
with
your
Obama.
president. It was your president.
Excuse me. That was with Obama, who gave you sheets, and I gave you javelins.
Yes.
I gave you the javelins to take out all those tanks. Obama gave you sheets. In fact, the statement is Obama gave sheets and Trump gave javelins. You got to be more thankful, because let me tell you, you don't have the cards. With us, you have the cards. But without us, you don't have any cards.
One more question to Mr. Vice President. I'm sorry.
It's going to be a tough deal to make,
Um,
because the attitudes have to change.
what if Russia breaks ceasefire? What if Russia breaks peace talks? What do you do then? I understand that it's a heated conversation right now.
What are you
but
saying?
what
She's
if
asking,
Russia-
what if Russia breaks the ceasefire?
What if anything? What if a bomb drops on your head right now?
But they have
Okay?
broken ceasefire.
What if they broke it? I don't know. They broke it with Biden because Biden, they didn't respect him. They didn't respect Obama. They respect me. Let me tell you, Putin went through a hell of a lot with me. He went through a phony witch hunt where they used him and Russia. Russia. You ever hear of that deal? That was a phony Hunter Biden, Joe Biden scam. Hillary Clinton, Shifty Adam Schiff. It was a Democrat scam. And he had to go through that. And he did go through it. We didn't end up in a war. And he went through it. He was accused of all that stuff. He had nothing to do with it. It came out of Hunter Biden's bathroom. It came out of Hunter Biden's bedroom. It was disgusting. And then they said, oh, the laptop from hell was made by Russia. The 51 agents. The whole thing was a scam. And he had to put up with that. He was being accused of all that stuff. All I can say is this. He might have broken deals with Obama and Bush, and he might have broken them with Biden. He did, maybe. Maybe he didn't. I don't know what happened. But he didn't break them with me. He wants to make a deal. I don't know if you can make a deal. The problem is, I've empowered you to be a tough guy. And I don't think you'd be a tough guy without the United States. And your people are very brave. But you're either going to make a deal or we're out. And if we're out, you'll fight it out. I don't think it's going to be pretty, but you'll fight it out. But you don't have the cards. But once we sign that deal, you're in a much better position. But you're not acting at all thankful. And that's not a nice thing. I'll be honest, that's not a nice thing. All right, I think we've seen enough. What do you think? Huh? This is going to be great television, I will say that. All right. We'll see what we can do about putting it together. Thanks, sir. I know this is
I need the back of this.
We'll see. I don't know.
I think what we've just witnessed there from that recording of what happened in the Oval Office is history. Actually, I think we've just witnessed history. What an extraordinary exchange there between President Zelensky being barracked, being criticised, being very harshly spoken to, perhaps correctly, by Donald Trump and the Vice President J.D. Vance. A really extraordinary piece of television, as Donald Trump himself said. Clear disagreements on the future, clear disagreements on the past, mentions of Hunter Biden, mentions of Putin, and the fact that Donald Trump kept saying on a number of occasions to Zelensky, you simply don't hold the cards. That was a really bad-tempered exchange there. I don't think I've ever seen anything quite like that. Certainly not a president of the United States being so angry, so annoyed with someone who is meant to be an ally. That exchange was really quite something, and I think that if that is the tone of what goes on for the next few hours, including the press conference we're going to bring you here on Talk, well, relations between the United States and Ukraine, and between the two men personally and J.D. Vance as well, in regard to President Zelensky, are going to be very, very seriously damaged by that. Some of the other photographs and information that are coming out of that Oval Office exchange, many, many other people in the Oval Office as well, not just the three men, including the Ukrainian ambassador to the UK, who at one stage had her head in her hands because of the interaction between the three men. On a number of occasions, J.D. Vance and Donald Trump said, sometimes in quite strong tones actually, saying, actually, you should be more grateful for what the United States has done in terms of the action that they have done, the hardware that they have given. Let's talk to Colonel Simon Diggins, former senior military officer and military analyst still. Simon, have you ever seen anything quite like that? Because I'm not sure I have.
No, it is quite extraordinary, Peter. Good evening to you and to all your listeners as well. This is quite extraordinary and really, really very ugly. I've not seen anything like that. I know in private there are often very strong conversations between world leaders and politicians when they're dealing with a kind of difficult issue. But to have a kind of public spat like this is quite extraordinary.
What do you make of the personalities involved? Because we know Zelensky is a strong character, obviously the president and vice president, strong characters as well. They really didn't meet in the middle at all, and there were sort of raised voices, clearly very tetchy, and they knew everybody was watching, the world was watching in fact, and I'm sure that exchange is going to be played over and over in the days to come.
No, it will be, and the only person who's going to benefit from this is President Putin. This is a kind of bad loss of temper on both sides. We know that the kind of rhetoric, the noise has been coming out of President Trump's administration for a while towards the Ukraine has been negative and very difficult. So there's always going to be a kind of difficult meeting for them to manage from there. And you're right about the personalities. I think one of the difficulties, particularly President Trump has, he has nobody around him who will gainsay him. There's nobody around him who's actually going to say, actually, you've got this wrong. Now, I think Prime Minister Starmer tried that yesterday, but I think that was a very polite meeting. It seemed to be a very positive meeting. And whatever President Trump thought about what Keir Starmer said, he didn't contradict him, or certainly didn't contradict him in public. Very different to what's happened today.
Yes, in fact, Keir Starmer was almost mute, actually. He said a few things, but really it was the Donald Trump show, whereas with this, there was no backing down, really, from Zelensky, especially when he was saying, he was talking about the sacrifices that had been made. But interesting to hear from Trump and saying, you know, you're conscripting people, you must admit that you're in a desperate situation, but really no meeting of minds there from Zelensky. In fact, quite the opposite, very ill-tempered from him as well. A lot of people, and I'm sure a lot of critics of Donald Trump, will say, oh, he was very tetchy, he was hectoring, bullying, whatever the kind of language the people will use. But Zelensky was giving as good as he got there.
No, and I think it indicates how desperate President Zelensky is to ensure that Ukraine is supported. I mean, the kind of backing he's had from, and still has, I'm glad to say, from countries like Britain in the past are clearly now threatened by what's happened with President Trump. So it was never going to be an easy meeting, not least of which because it was all originally built around signing a minerals deal, which did not come with any specific security guarantees. It felt like a sort of, this is a payback time for all the monies which we have paid you. So it was always going to start as a one-way deal, but I think everyone hoped it might turn into something more positive. In fact, it's turned into something really rather dangerous and awful.
Simon, we're going to keep talking, but I just want to say to our viewers and listeners, I wonder what you think of that remarkable exchange between Donald Trump, J.D. Vance and President Zelensky in the Oval Office. Very ill-tempered. I think we got a lot of information as well, not just information about the very bad relationship between the Americans and the Ukrainians, but also about how things will progress. And I wonder what you think about that. 0344 499 1000. Amanda says, what a spectacle. Vance and Trump ganging up on Zelensky. I could hardly believe my ears. Dawn says, hi Peter, Zelensky is not flavour of the month with Trump and Vance, no doubt about that. Very, very interesting thoughts on that. I wonder, Simon Diggins is with us, Colonel Simon Diggins. Simon, where does this leave things now? Because they've got the rest of this visit to go on. We've got a number of hours. We've got a joint press conference coming up as well. Will this sort of calm down, do you think, or will it get even worse as time goes on? Surely there will be a little bit of, let cool heads prevail happening here behind the scenes.
You would hope so. But again, it really depends on whether or not that we've got individuals within Trump's White House who can say, look, this didn't go very well and we need to try and find a different way to try and do this. I think if I was organising this, I was the Sherpa of this particular meeting, I'd probably be looking very carefully at the schedule and whether or not we can make this thing work or not. And this, of course, is the time when friends of Ukraine, and I hope friends of the United States as well, like Britain, should be we'll be working the phones. Okay, yes. Come on, we've got to do something about this. This is not good. How can we pull this back from the brink?
And it's very interesting you mentioned that, because presumably, Keir Starmer has said he wants to act as a bridge between the Americans and he's holding this European summit on Sunday. It'll be interesting to see how that goes. But there will be many European allies. I mean, for us watching and listening to it, it's extraordinary. We're taking it in. We're talking about it here on Talk. But for the diplomatic side of things, they will have looked on in absolute horror, especially for people like Keir Starmer who want to be supportive of Ukraine, but nonetheless somewhere in the middle here.
No, absolutely. I mean, it was very much part of the messaging that Keir Starmer said he was going to convey to President Trump yesterday, and I'm sure in the days before that, through ambassadors and everything that went through that. So I'm sure we had the right intent there, and literally, I was listening to the news programs this morning saying how well the visit had gone, and obviously that left the impression that there'd been if not a sort of meeting of mind, or at least an acceptance, there was another way of looking at Ukraine. And less than 12 hours later, 12 hours after Keir Starmer returns to the UK, this happened. So this is very difficult.
It is extraordinary that it has happened under Donald Trump, but also some people perhaps not surprised that he speaks his mind. He always has. He's always communicated very, very directly. Brad in Cambridge has been in touch and says, wow, that was unpleasant. Trump was right on the facts, but he didn't need to completely humiliate Zelensky in public. It just came across as bullying or even blackmail. I wonder what you think of that kind of sentiment, Simon.
Yeah, I'm not sure he is right on the facts. I mean, he's got his figures wrong about the $350 billion which he claims has been passed to Ukraine. I mean, the US has been extremely generous, but it's not $350 billion worth of that. He's also completely wrong about who started this war. So, the fundamental assumptions which we hoped that Keir Starmer and President Macron had tried to change in Trump's mind, he had a sort of different understanding of what had happened. But it would appear that his initial misunderstandings, and that can only come down to the kind of briefing he's received, are still, if you like, the way he thinks about the conflict.
Simon, thank you. That's Colonel Simon Diggins there, military analyst, former senior officer in the UK Army, of course. We're seeing some pictures now, if you happen to be watching on the screen, although I know a lot of people are listening on the radio, that President Zelensky, a better tempered part of the meeting where he was showing pictures of prisoners of war to Donald Trump. That was before things got pretty feisty in the Oval Office there. Peter in Croydon was watching and listening to that as well and has given me a ring in 0344 499 1000, as you can too. Peter, just before the news, what did you make of that really bizarre discussion between J.D. Vance, Donald Trump and President Zelensky?
Well, I mean, it's extraordinary, but I'm not surprised, to be honest. I mean, I've never trusted Zelensky. And going back to what you said about the question that was asked by Peston about Trump being about Trump saying he's a dictator. Well, I think there's a bit of constant. Maybe he was thinking he's been a bit of a dictator by asking for all this money because he was at all these conferences, wasn't he?
Yeah, that's right. And actually, maybe Trump is saying, hold on a second, back in your box a bit. You don't hold the cards. He kept saying that over and over again, didn't he, Peter? He said, you don't hold the cards. Maybe it's about Zelensky being more realistic about the position that he's in.
Yeah. I mean, like I say, the pictures, when Zelensky was showing the pictures, it looked nice and calm, didn't it?
I think it was at that stage, and then it got very ill-tempered after that, Peter.
Absolutely. You know. And like I say, I just don't trust Zelensky. I'm sorry, I don't.
Well, it appears that Donald Trump and certainly J.D. Vance as well. I think we saw a side of J.D. Vance that, I mean, we've seen a bit of before as well, but we haven't seen him just be so direct with the leader when he was essentially saying over and over again, you should be a bit more grateful to the United States and all the military help that he has given. Peter, thanks for your call. That's Peter in Croydon there. A number of other people wanting to respond to this. We're going to do that in the next hour. We may get a press conference in the next hour, or it may be in Kevin O'Sullivan's programme as well. What on earth is that going to be like? Is that going to be cooler? Are they going to have cool heads in that, or will they bicker again? Very, very interesting times. Fascinating discussion between President Trump and President Zelensky there in the Oval Office. If you missed it, we're going to play a little bit more of it after the news. We're going to get your reaction as well. Use the break, pick up the phone, let us know what you think. 0344 499 1000. Crazy times.
Across the UK, on DAB+, on your smart speaker, on your smart TV, and on your side.
It's just gone 6 o'clock, and in the last 10 or 15 minutes we've seen some really extraordinary scenes from the Oval Office. President Zelensky slapped down by President Trump and Vice President JD Vance. We're going to bring you that exchange again, or some of it anyway. Really bad-tempered. Donald Trump being very, very critical of President Zelensky. JD Vance saying that Zelensky wasn't in any way grateful enough to the United States and what they had done. Donald Trump saying that a compromise needed to be reached with Putin, and also that Zelensky, he repeatedly said, didn't hold any of the cards and had to be realistic. It was a very, very ill-tempered exchange. Zelensky giving as good as he got. Some people saying he was bullied. He was certainly humiliated. We'll have reaction between now and 7 o'clock from around the world, hopefully including Ukraine. Our producers behind the scenes are working hard because this is a big breaking news story. I think we witnessed history 20 minutes ago. I want your reaction as well, not just the experts or so-called experts. I want your reaction. What do you think of the President of the United States saying this, being so open about this to the President of Ukraine? 0344 499 1000 is the number to call. We'll get as many of you on between now and 7 when Kevin O'Sullivan takes over as we can. There's going to be a press conference at some stage. It hasn't been cancelled yet. Maybe it will be between the two men. I think that's going to be pretty box office as well. But what are the implications? What are the implications for the Americans, for the Ukrainians, and here in the United Kingdom? Stay with us here on Talk. That number again, 0344 499 1000. Let's go straight to Dr. Bob Seeley. He's a former Conservative MP. He's a military expert. He knows Ukraine backwards. He's also author of Total War, about new forms of warfare in the 21st century. Bob, what an incredibly interesting, dynamic, worrying, some would say, exchange. What did you think?
It is pretty worrying. By the way, sorry about my backdrop. I've literally just flown back from Poland and from Ukraine. So I'm in the Carousel Lounge.
Well, thank you for joining us, Bob. We can hear you clearly, so just go ahead.
Okay, it's really worrying. You're going to have a split in the West now between people who are going to be backing Ukraine and people who aren't. And it looks like that Trump is about, the worst case scenario, Trump is going to pull support for Ukraine, and then the Ukrainians will have to rely on themselves, but also what Europe can step up to provide. I think what really worries me and scares me right at the moment is the Russian talking points that Trump is using. So the World War III line is basically a line to scare people, do what Russia says, otherwise, Russia is somehow going to destroy the world. The lack of gratitude, and the fact is that, they need to do a compromise. And the Russians have repeatedly said they want more land, not less. So the idea that Zelensky can give up not only the land that they've lost in perpetuity, but then hand over more land to the Russians, which is what the Russians want, is going to destroy Zelensky. And actually what Putin wants is to use Trump to cause civil conflict and civil war in Ukraine to undermine the cohesion of that society. So the next time he launches his army in there, after a short ceasefire of maybe a few months, he will be able to destroy that country. And right now, Trump is the battering ram by which he will do that.
After watching that exchange, how likely do you think it is that America will pull support for Ukraine?
Well, watching that, I think it's very likely, but I think there will be a lot of action behind the scenes. Zelensky will come out a little bit repentant. He will want not to break, or he will not want to be seen to be the person breaking. If there's a break, it will have to come from the American side. So he will eat a little bit of humble pie, but there is only a limited amount of humble pie that he can eat before Ukrainians say, you are selling us out. So Zelensky can't just go there and grovel and agree to whatever Trump says. And I'm really worried to the extent to which Trump is effectively psychologically compromised and Putin thinks he's got his person in the White House. I've been spending a week in Ukraine. There are some security officials I've talked with who think that actually the Russians are not that comfortable with Trump because he's very not unstable, but you never know what you're going to get with him. But there are other people who have no doubt that he is following, or he's psychologically in some way compromised by his relationship with Putin, or Putin thinks that he's got somebody who can do his bidding and can deliver a victory that Putin's armies couldn't deliver on the battlefield.
I wonder what is happening behind the scenes now. We saw a very public row there. We saw the sort of thing that we, the public, are not meant to see when these diplomatic rows happen. What do you think is happening in the rival camps, essentially, in the White House? The Ukrainians, of course, will have their own rooms and be able to have those kind of discussions. What kind of discussions will be going on now?
I think there's going to be lots of discussion. So the Ukrainians will be talking to the Americans, trying to calm things down, and some people in the State Department and the Oval Office will probably be trying to do the same. Other people will be saying, to hell with you, we don't care. So there's that dynamic. The Brits and the French will probably pretty quickly try to get in with the Americans and just say, well, let's calm things down. We are willing to take up more of the slack, but you can't pull out completely. So the big question is, to what extent is this Trump looking for an excuse to cut ties, and why is he doing so? Why is he trying to cut a deal with Russia over the heads of Ukraine and effectively divide up a country, another country, which he doesn't really, well, he doesn't have the right to do. Although the US is by some margin the biggest single provider of military and financial support, overall, the European nations as a collective have provided more. And when it comes to military advice, I think the Brits have been out in the field of their own. So I think they've done superb work. So there's lots of dynamics at the moment. I think the Brits will be looking at this with a sense of horror. I think so will many people in Europe, for sure. But let's just see to what extent they calm it down at the press conference, or if the press conference is called off altogether, then I think there's a problem, and I think you will see Trump pulling out, which is absolutely what the Russians want. And the Russian media is going to be in absolute heaven about this, and the Kremlin will be thinking this is just getting better and better, because what they want is to weaken Ukraine as much as possible in order to destroy that country. They don't want to live in peace. We just got to be serious about this. They don't want to live in peace. Sorry about the background noise.
Don't worry, we can hear you.
They want to destroy Ukraine, which is why they invaded in the first place. If there is a ceasefire, it will be for Russia to rearm and for Russia then to use economic and political warfare, assassination, bribery, corruption, to try to get its fingers back into Ukraine. And as we know, Ukraine's had a big problem with corruption. It's not a clean, that political system is not a clean system.
That's right.
And they will try to get their people into parliament, they will put up credible and plausible candidates in those elections, and they will really try to work to divide and manipulate that society. But right now, Trump is playing into Putin's hands. Why? I don't know.
Bob, thank you. That's Dr. Bob Seeley there. He's a former Conservative MP. He's a military expert. He's author of Total War, About New Forms of Warfare in the 21st Century. He's just back, actually, literally in the airport from Poland and from Ukraine. If you've just joined us, and I'm not naive enough to think that everybody listens to all 3 hours of this programme or watches all 3 hours of this programme, perhaps you just tuned in, maybe you just got into the car, or got into the house, you switched the telly on or switched the radio on. About half an hour ago, we got footage through from the Oval Office of the White House where President Zelenskyy of Ukraine has been meeting Donald Trump, and in the room lots of other people, including JD Vance, the Vice President of the United States. And an extraordinary row ensued in public. Donald Trump said Zelenskyy is gambling with World War III. He said he wasn't grateful enough. JD Vance piled into that as well. Very, very interesting diplomatic row that usually you do not see in public, but we have today, and I think this is going to be one of the defining aspects of Donald Trump's time as president. I think it's a defining moment in the war in Ukraine. And just in case you're joining us, or even if you heard it the first time, it's so extraordinary that I know I want to see it again and want to hear it again. So we'll hear a bit of it again now.
What kind of diplomacy, JD, you are speaking about? What do you mean?
I'm talking about the kind of diplomacy that's going to end the destruction of your country.
Yes, but if you
Mr. President, with respect, I think it's disrespectful for you to come into the Oval Office and try to litigate this in front of the American media. Right now, you guys are going around and forcing conscripts to the front lines because you have manpower problems. You should be thanking the President for trying to bring an end to this conflict.
Have you ever been to Ukraine? Did you say what problems we have?
I have been to.
Count one.
I've actually watched and seen the stories, and I know what happens is you bring them on a propaganda tour, Mr. President. Do you disagree that you've had problems bringing people into your military? And do you think that it's respectful to come to the Oval Office of the United States of America and attack the administration that is trying to prevent the destruction of your country?
A lot of questions. Let's start from the beginning.
Sure.
First of all, during the war, everybody has problems, even you, but you have nice ocean and don't feel now, but you will feel it in the future. God bless.
You don't know that.
God bless. God bless. You will not have a war.
Don't tell us what we're going to feel. We're trying to solve a problem. Don't tell us what we're going to feel.
I'm not telling you.
Because
I'm
you're in no
answering on this
position to
question.
dictate that.
That's
Remember
exactly
this.
what I'm not
You're
dictating.
in no position to dictate what we're going to feel.
You
We're
will-
going to feel very
you will
good.
feel influenced.
We're going to feel very
I'm
good and
telling
very
you,
strong.
You will feel influenced.
You're right now not in a very good position. You've allowed
From the
yourself
very-
to be in a
from
very
the very
bad position,
beginning
and
of
he
the
happens
war.
to be right about
From the very beginning of the war.
You're not
Mr.
in a
Brown,
good position.
I
You don't
was
have the cards right now. With us, you start having
not playing
cards.
cards.
But right now, you
I'm
don't.
very
Yeah, you're playing
serious,
cards.
Mr. President.
You're
I'm
playing
very
cards.
serious.
You're
I'm
gambling
the
with the
president
lives
in
of
war.
millions of people.
You think-
You're gambling with World War
do you-
III.
what do you think
You're
about?
gambling with
What do you
World
think
War
about?
III. And
You-
what you're doing is very disrespectful to the country, this country. That's
with
back
all
to you.
respect to your
Far more than a lot of people said
very
they
respect.
should have.
Have you said thank you once this
A lot
entire
of
meeting?
times.
No, in this
Even
entire meeting, have
today.
you said thank
Even
you?
today.
You went to Pennsylvania and campaigned for the opposition in October. Offer some words of appreciation for the United States of America and the president who's trying to save your country.
Please, you think that if you will speak very loudly about the war, you
He's
can...
not speaking loudly. He's not
Yeah.
speaking loudly. Your country is
Can I-
in big
can I-
trouble.
can I
Wait a
answer?
minute. No.
Can
You've
I
done a lot
answer?
of talking. Your country is in big trouble.
I know.
You're not
I
winning.
know.
You're not winning this.
I...
You have a damn good chance of
we are
coming out
staying,
okay because of
Mr.
us.
President, we are staying in our country, staying strong from the very beginning of the war. We've been alone, and we are thankful. I said thanks
You haven't
in
been
this
alone.
cabinet,
You
and
haven't
not
been
only
alone.
in this
We
cabinet.
gave you, through
I
this
said thank
stupid
you.
president, $350 billion.
You voted
we gave
for
you
your
military equipment,
You
and your
voted
men
for
are
your
brave,
president.
but they had to use our military.
What about
if you didn't have
You
our
invited
military
me-
equipment,
You invited
if
me
you
to
didn't
speak.
have our military equipment, this war would have been over in 2 weeks.
In 3
okay?
days, I heard it from Putin. In 3 days.
Sort of a shame Jeremy Kyle's off today. He'd have been very useful in the Oval Office this afternoon. What an extraordinary exchange. Make a deal or we're out. You're not in a good position. You don't hold the cards. I'm not playing cards, says President Zelensky. You're gambling with World War III, says President Trump, wagging his finger at him. Zelensky folding his arms. Have you said thank you once? That's what J.D. Vance, the Vice President, said. Extraordinary scenes. James Mathewson is a former Labour spokesman. James, have you seen anything like this?
I have, Peter. Do you know where I've seen it, though? I've seen it in trade union negotiations. I've seen it between bosses who are bullies and their employees or their subordinates, and I've seen it in the back halls of Westminster. I've never seen that done in the public eye before. There's a reason for that, and there's a reason other people don't do it in the public eye, and it's because people do not have the lack of disrespect for people who are supposed to be their allies. I am absolutely... My blood is boiling right now.
Who's been disrespectful? Who's been disrespectful? Both of them? All of them? All three of them?
No, not all three of them at all. Zelensky, in that entire, whatever you can call it, that disagreement, that bust-up, is holding himself back. And it is the only thing that is stopping him from getting up and walking out of that humiliating situation is the fact that his people need him to make this work. That's the only thing that's making him stick there. Those two, Vance and Trump, the bullies in the room, are humiliating him because they know that he can't push back. And ask yourself this question: would they do that to Putin? Would they ever do that to a known dictator who murders his political rivals and treats his population like trash? No.
What did they say? Okay. What did Trump and Vance say that was wrong? I mean, you can talk about, obviously, the way they said it. You know, you're talking about hectoring, bullying, those. I don't want to put words in your mouth, but I think you probably agree with those terms. I mean, he's essentially saying you're not in a good position, you don't hold the cards, you need to compromise, and Zelensky's pushing back. I mean, in what way is Trump wrong there, do you think?
Zelensky said, I know, to those points. That's why I'm here. He said, I know. He said, you're in a difficult position. You do not hold all the cards. I know is what he said. It's J.D. Vance who chimes in, and it almost feels like a setup. I don't want to get down these rabbit holes of, conspiracy theories.
There will be people who wonder whether this was planned, whether this was the plan all along.
It feels like a stitch-up, and I imagine Zelensky feels exactly the same, because hang on a minute, why is J.D. Vance, the vice president of that country, talking to a man who has just fought a war right, who has fought a war on Europe's front line, and who has the respect, at least, whether you like him, whether you disagree with him, whatever you think, he has the base respect of most leaders around the world other than Putin and his allies. And J.D. Vance has the confidence as a newly elected vice president to talk to him like that. I don't agree with Bob Seeley on much. And this is a miracle that I'm agreeing with him on anything, to be honest. But the fact that Bob Seeley's just told you there that most of the points that J.D. Vance made, Trump less so, because I don't think Trump has a clue what's going on. But J.D. Vance is steering that conversation, and it's pure Kremlin propaganda. He called Zelensky a propagandist. He said that he's using propaganda to us when he brings Western leaders to see the war. I mean, that's a complete Russian lie. It's unbelievable.
Okay, thank you, James Mathewson there, former Labour spokesman. Let's get your reaction as well. Barry says war is abhorrent, Peter, and if Trump can end it quickly, more power to him. Well, another person says, wow, that Oval Office bus stop, it looks like Ukraine is doomed now. Russia will be in Kyiv by June. Tony says it's over for Zelensky. LOL, says Tony. Perhaps not so many laughs from the Ukrainian people. Jane says it just seems everyone has said yes to Zelensky. He hasn't heard no before and doesn't know what to do. People say Zelensky wasn't at the table. He is at the top one now. Perhaps negotiating in public wasn't the best idea, says Jane. Simon in Reading has given me a ring, 0344 499 1000. Simon, what do you think of this?
Well, I just step back from the for all for a minute, because I just think it's down to a communication mix-up. What Zelensky was trying to do, or what he was going on to say, is, look, I've had 3 or 4 presidents, one after the other, give me assurances, and next minute Putin's invading me. What's the difference this time? What's the difference of me making an agreement with you, not getting invaded in the next 3 months? You see what I mean? And then what Vance did was just try to shut him down, and then Trump followed by just trying to shut him down because he didn't know where he was going. And you could hear in the background Zelensky saying, "Look, I've had these presidents, and I keep getting invaded." You know, that's the essence of what he's saying. So he's just about to sign a massive deal with America. What assurances do I have?
Yeah.
You know, all Trump and Vance had to say was, look, if you think we're going to have our employees or our citizens in your country digging for fine minerals and we're not going to look after them, then you're mad. Of course we're going to look after them. Of course Putin's not going to invade while we're there.
Who do you think was
a 10-year project, for God's sake? You know?
Who do you think, if anybody, was in control there? Do you think Trump was in control?
No one. He got out of control very quickly because Mr. Zelensky was trying to explain in pidgin English, let's say, to the Americans what he was trying to get over, but didn't get a chance. He didn't get a chance to put his point across. So I think in the back room, I think there'd be a bit of calming down, have a little drink of water, then go back into it and ask Zelensky, look, what exactly do you mean? Yeah. And then they can negotiate from there, because it's not, in the big scheme of things, it's not a massive problem, because as long as the Americans say, whilst we're in your country digging for ore, you will.
But are they going to be? And is that actually going to be signed?
The area in which they're going to be digging is near enough on the Russian border anyway.
Well, we'll see, Simon. But listen, thank you for that. Lots of good points from Simon there. Mick in Wellington says, OMG, what dirt has Putin got on Trump? Michael in Norfolk, I believe Zelensky is trying to put a peace deal guaranteed by Trump in case Putin doesn't stick to a deal. Andrew in Herne Hill, I think we've just witnessed the overtures to World War III. Steve in Cambridge, good evening, Peter. I like this no-nonsense Trump. Only wish he had done the same with that plonker Starmer. Great show as usual. Trevor says, I know you're going to get loads of messages. For me, I'd be very interested to see what Starmer has to say about this press conference. He won't know which side to go on. Well, if he wants to be the bridge, how on earth would you bridge the gap between those two men? It's huge. And still this evening, we've got a press conference to come. It hasn't been cancelled just yet. If I had anything to do with that, I would be advising both Trump and Zelensky to cancel it. But then, of course, that just shows how dramatically bad things have got. Stuart says, I think perhaps Zelensky's tenure is coming to an end, as his own people will see the meeting in the White House and realise he's a busted flush. And Anne, a very interesting one, says, the spoils of war, with mothers, wives, sisters mourn their dead, sickening and heartbreaking. We'll get more of your reaction and more reaction from various military figures, diplomatic people. We're making a lot of phone calls, and between now and 7 we're going to speak to a variety of people on this extraordinary row between President Zelensky and President Trump in the Oval Office. Stay with us.
I said what I said, which is that we do have, of course, a special relationship with our friends in the UK and also with some of our European allies, but we also know that there have been infringements on free speech that actually affect not just the British, of course, what the British do in their own country is up to them, but also affect American technology.
Across the UK, on DAB+, on your smart speaker, on your smart TV, and on your side. This is Talk.
In the last few minutes, there has been a development, and that is that the car that is used for foreign dignitaries, has drawn up outside the entrance at the White House. It is not outside the realms of possibility that Vladimir Zelenskyy is about to leave the White House, to walk out of these talks. This is the car he arrived in, the huge bulletproof car that is used for foreign dignitaries. Keir Starmer was in either it or something like it yesterday. It has the Ukrainian flag on one side of the front of it and the American flag on the other. What usually happens is that basically the red carpet is ruled out for dignitaries. This was meant to be a series of talks. There was meant to be a press conference. All of that put in jeopardy by what has been happening in the Oval Office today. Those extraordinary scenes, that row, big row between President Zelenskyy, President Trump and Vice President J.D. Vance on the side of Trump, of course, backing him up. We now see the car outside the portico at the White House. That's not meant to happen. Zelensky's meant to be there for some hours to come. We'll keep an eye on that. We have it on the screen at the moment, and we will see what's going to happen there. We'll keep you up to date, but in the meantime, we're going to talk to Sean Bell, who's a former fighter pilot and now a military analyst, and Philip Ingram, former senior military intelligence officer. There's a lot happening. Let's start with Sean. What did you make of that row, Sean? Have you ever seen anything like it in public anyway?
Yeah, good evening, Peter. What an interesting last 24 hours since I last spoke to you. No, I've not seen anything like that. But I think it is quite fascinating. The whole world has been watching President Trump make some outrageous statements about Panama Canal, about Canada, about Greenland, about Gaza, and then about Ukraine. And of course, we've seen lots of foreign dignitaries just basically trying to pander to President Trump's ego and sort of just hopefully we'll see some measured response. Whereas, of course, for President Zelenskyy, he's seen his hundreds of thousands of his countrymen die, millions have to leave their homes, watch communities devastated, and then he's had to listen as President Trump has dealt directly with President Putin and sort of marginalized him. And so there's a lot of friction there, and I suspect that it's one thing having diplomacy, it's quite another actually if President Trump, who clearly wants to be in control of that conversation, I'm not entirely sure that President Zelenskyy want to then get away with it. And of course, you have to remember, this is not President Zelenskyy's first language. It did appear he was simply trying to navigate his way through a perfectly reasonable point. And then all of a sudden, some of Trump's acolytes sort of jump into that conversation, and it quickly descended into very unpleasant rhetoric. So, and
it was accused of being very disrespectful, the kind of language, make a deal or we're out, said Trump. You're not in a good place. You don't hold the cards. J.D. Vance as well, very interestingly, saying that President Zelenskyy should be more grateful to the United States. Philip Ingram, what did you make of it?
Well, I have never seen anything as extraordinary as that exchange. You know, I think Zelenskyy, and I agree with Sean, you're working in a second language, a language that he didn't speak properly only a few years ago. Was ambushed by J.D. Vance, the US Vice President, and then by Donald Trump, who came down understandably on J.D. Vance's side. But for that to happen in a public exchange was absolutely extraordinary. I am shocked.
What happens now? Because I think the world is shocked by that. There are people who are just getting a bit of information. But for people who saw it at the time or very, very shortly, I mean, really the last hour has changed the diplomatic relationship, perhaps irrevocably, between Zelenskyy and Trump. I wonder what you think happens now. Could America pull out of Ukraine? We know Donald Trump is a serious player here, and that he can make very decisive actions because of the power of the office that he holds.
Well, the first thing that's happened is Vladimir Putin has poured a very large glass of best Russian vodka and is sitting back with his feet on his desk, stroking his white cat, laughing away at everything that's going on. I think what's going to happen realistically are the officials that advise both presidents behind closed doors are going to very quickly get together and try and find a way of diffusing this situation. Yes, the Americans could pull out. Donald Trump could do anything. And it's going to make a very interesting meeting of the European NATO leaders tomorrow in London, of which President Zelensky is attending.
That's right, that's right. And there'll be a press conference on Sunday as well that Starmer will be taking part in. Very, very interesting. Philip, thank you for your reaction there. Sean Bell, just to go back to you, what do you think happens now? I mean, we can see on our screens, if you're watching the screen, for those many more people who are listening on the radio, I can tell you that the diplomatic car is outside the portico at the White House. It looks as if Zelensky may be leaving. What do you think happens now, Sean, and what are the implications?
Well, in the near term, clearly it's been something we've never seen before, and there'll be headlines all around the world, and there'll be worries that America, as you just said, will pull out. I have to say, when the dust settles a little bit on this, you know, President Trump actually doesn't want to be friends with President Putin. He would not want to see his legacy being to reward an invasion, a brutal invasion into Europe. He's clearly trying to play his hand carefully here. He's trying to get Europe to step up, do more of the defense for Ukraine. And of course, all of this will play more into his hands. But I'm not sure his legacy will be wanting to leave Ukraine literally in the lurch. And I suspect, exactly as Philip said, there'll be a bit of work behind the scenes. I suspect there'll be a bit of licking of wounds. President Trump doesn't like his authority to be questioned. He will not like the way this has gone. He will see it as disrespectful. But also, I think from this side of the Atlantic, we have to respect the fact that Zelensky's been at war for years. He's managed to hold out when many thought he wouldn't. And actually, this might galvanize the West into firming up the support that's provided. So I think we've got to let a little bit of the dust settle off on this absolutely amazing diplomatic incident that's occurred in front of our eyes the last couple of hours.
Thank you, Sean. That's Sean Bell there, who's a former fighter pilot, now military analyst. Zelensky, since that event, since that discussion in the Oval Office, President Trump has put on Truth Social, the social media site. He says Volodymyr Zelensky is not ready for peace if America is involved. He said in a post on Truth Social following that very contentious meeting. Your reaction to it is coming now. Simon in Nottingham has texted me to say, "Hi Peter, I think the discussion was really refreshing, as I'm sure things like that are said behind closed doors. But Trump has shown that he is transparent and will stick to his word, unlike most politicians, especially ours." Simon, I was in politics for 3.5 years. I was involved in international negotiations, and I can tell you that that is a very, very rare thing in private or in public. Di says, "I am gobsmacked and appalled at Trump's behaviour. He is so hell-bent on blackmailing Zelensky into submission for his own ego and mineral revenue, he has to revert it in camera to the bully he is at heart." Disgusting, says Di. What do you think? Is Di right? Do you think others are right? What do you think Trump was right to say what he said? Maybe he was justified. 0344 499 1000. 28 minutes left of this programme. Then Kevin O'Sullivan, I am absolutely sure, will be covering this story between 7 and 10. Stephen is in Manchester and has given me a ring. Stephen, what do you think?
How you doing, mate? You all right?
Hi, very well. What an evening.
By the way, firstly, lovely to talk to you, Peter.
Thank you.
I think you're a very fair representative of all sorts of views. So
thank you, Stephen.
There you go.
There we go. What do you think?
I just had to watch that interview on YouTube before Jodie. By the way, Jodie is lovely, by the way.
Okay.
My favourite Everton.
Everyone's lovely.
Yeah.
Anyone you don't like. But tell us what you think of Zelensky and Trump.
I was shocked, mate, to be honest with you. I just thought, for a start, probably J.D. Vance is probably going to be the next president of the United States. I was shocked with him. Trump didn't say a lot, did he, to start with? But it was only sort of after Vance sort of did what he did. And I just thought that was so disrespectful towards Zelensky, honestly.
Stephen, I'm sorry to interrupt you. I'll try to come back to you, but we're just going to say some breaking news now, and that is that a White House official has said that Zelensky is leaving the White House early after that meeting in the Oval Office. So he hasn't left just yet, but I think he's in the process of leaving. The car is there anyway, so walking out of those talks, and just that full Truth Social post by Donald Trump. This is after the Oval Office exchange. He says, "I have determined that President Zelensky is not ready for peace if America is involved, because he feels our involvement gives him a big advantage in negotiations. I don't want advantage, I want peace. He disrespected the United States of America in its cherished Oval Office. He can come back when he is ready for peace," says Trump. So an acceptance in that message and a confirmation from a White House official that Volodymyr Zelensky is leaving the White House. We will keep that on the screen. If you want to switch on your telly on YouTube or your connected device, you can see the car that Zelensky is going to get into, I would imagine, in the next few minutes. A really astonishing series of events this evening and indeed this afternoon in Washington. It's 5 hours behind. Stephen, is Zelensky right to walk out, do you think? Stephen, are you still with me?
I think, are you there?
Yes, go ahead. Go ahead.
I think Vance disrespected him before Trump did. Trump didn't say a lot, did he? Until sort of the latter end of the conversation. Listen, I think that was totally... Listen, you know about proxy wars, don't you? Know Vietnam is a proxy war between China and America, and, you know, French kicked it off and then legged it, so let's not go on about that. But anyway... I thought I was so disrespectful of J.D. Vance, who's obviously not going to be a quiet vice president, I guess. And, you know, normally they're really quiet, aren't they, vice presidents?
Kamala Harris, nobody knew who she was until about a year ago. Very few people had any real sense of who she was. But J.D. Vance, he knows, of course, that Trump only has, less than 4 years left.
Peter, I thought it was so disrespectful the way Vance... I'm not even going to call him JD because that gives him credence. Get lost, JD. You're too old. No one listens to techno. But I just thought that was so disrespectful. And it wasn't until towards, if you watch that interview, so I've just watched it on YouTube.
Well, we're gonna play, Stephen. We've got to leave it there because we've got to go to a break. But listen, thank you for your points. There's lots more to come between now and 7. Volodymyr Zelensky is about to leave the White House. We have confirmed he's going. We'll bring you all the latest in just a few minutes here on Talk.
Across the UK, on DAB+, on your smart speaker, on your smart TV, and on your side. This is Talk.
Well, we're still keeping a very close eye on the White House and the portico there. The car is there, and we know that Volodymyr Zelensky is leaving the White House early after that Oval Office meeting earlier. Let's just get some of your reaction, and then we're going to replay what actually happened, because if you're just joining us or you haven't been with us for the whole show, really extraordinary, I would say historic scenes actually at the White House, and the reaction to what happened in the Oval Office from Donald Trump, well, from Volodymyr Zelensky, he's leaving, he's out of here, and from Donald Trump, he has said on Truth Social, I have determined that President Zelensky is not ready for peace if America is involved, because he feels our involvement gives him a big advantage in negotiations. I don't want advantage, I want peace. He disrespected the United States of America in its cherished Oval Office. He can come back when he is ready for peace. An international crisis right now. Brad has been in touch to say, I have the feeling that this was set up as pure theatre so that Trump can show the American people how tough he is. That can be the only reason it was held in public. Tony says, why are they doing this in public? Surely diplomacy is needed, not a public spat. Anne says, I don't often agree with James Mathewson, but I too think that argument was well rehearsed on both sides. Jane says, I've always backed Trump. I just hope he can stop this awful war. Zelensky looks totally humiliated, but I do wonder if it was a setup. Very, very worrying, says Jane. Louise says, I think Trump should have had a day off playing golf after having to deal with Macron and Starmer, and Zelensky should have got more sleep. Tired men under pressure. Penny says, if Putin wins, he will just walk into every country he can. None of that makes America look good, and worse still, Trump is hand in glove with Putin, who is evil personified. That was painful to watch. Dan in Kent, looks like Europe are on their own. Left or right, we can't take on Russia. And Marty in Seaham says, that was intense, Peter. I feel they were all in... Oh, Zelensky's coming out now, I think. We are at the portico. Yeah, there's Zelensky. He's not looking at the camera. He's very, very quickly getting into the car, back to the cameras, getting into the car there outside the White House, and he is leaving the White House. This has gone tremendously badly. There will be no press conference between Zelensky and President Trump. That was meant to happen. Instead, it didn't happen, and it won't happen now. Instead, the Oval Office, questions came from the press, not very many questions from the press. In fact, what happened was a very, very public row, about as public as you could possibly get, in the Oval Office between Zelensky and between J.D. Vance and Donald Trump on the other side of that. There are some other officials now walking out, quite a few of Zelensky's people walking out of the White House now, who are getting into other vehicles. We know this vehicle that he is in, this diplomatic car, is going to leave. It's got the flags on the front of it, the stars and stripes, and indeed the Ukrainian flag with blue and yellow. We're all familiar with that. And Zelensky is leaving the White House. He's not ready for peace if America is involved. That is what Donald Trump has said after these extraordinary scenes in the Oval Office. As Zelensky is about to leave, he's in the car. James Sunderland joins me, Colonel James Sunderland, who is a former Conservative MP, and he's also obviously a former senior military officer. James, Zelensky about to leave, extraordinary scenes. We got all the detail about an hour ago. We hope to play you it again before the end of the programme. What do you make of this? Unprecedented, I would say.
It's completely unprecedented. I mean, I can't recall a situation where two world leaders, particularly allies, are arguing so publicly. I mean, the scenes were quite unedifying.
Sorry to interrupt you, James, but just to say very briefly that the Zelensky car has now left the White House. It has gone out there, and much, much earlier than was expected, and many of Zelensky's people getting into their vehicles and leaving too, James.
Yeah, extraordinary. I mean, the talks have clearly broken down. I now fear for the future. Why? Because US support is needed to underpin Ukrainian defence against Russia, and quite clearly, much rests now on this. But what's key for me at the moment is that this very isolationist stance that Trump is peddling, it could have catastrophic consequences for European security.
Yes, it could. And I wonder, how seriously you think Donald Trump's threat was to perhaps even pull out of Ukraine, and what implications that could have, James.
Well, it's interesting because Trump clearly wants something from Ukraine. I mean, this access to minerals is important to the US, and quite clearly the US wants something back in terms of the weaponry and the money and the funding that it's given to Ukraine already. So I don't think the US itself is in a position to walk away from these talks. But quite clearly, the terms weren't acceptable to Zelenskyy. Quite clearly, he doesn't want to mortgage his entire country's future to keep Trump happy. And also, I think that Ukraine are clearly wanting the world to know that they're at war. Some of the rhetoric coming out of the White House this afternoon was quite striking in the sense that I don't think Trump or Vance appreciated that these guys are at war. The human cost has been huge. They've lost thousands of people, women, children, fighters, and that the Ukraine situation is pretty desperate for them.
James, thank you. That's Colonel James Sunderland, who is a former MP as well. He's been involved in lots of things to do with veterans and chair of the Armed Forces Bill Select Committee. He was a colonel in the Army. Really, really interesting times. Interesting reaction from him. No doubt Kevin O'Sullivan will be covering it between 7 and 10 as well. That press conference, of course, now not happening because Zelenskyy out of the White House. He has left. The Ukrainian delegation have left as well. Extraordinary scenes. We're going to play it to you again because it is just so crazy. I've never seen anything like it, and I've been around a while covering politics and being involved in politics. We're going to play you some of what happened in the Oval Office earlier today after the break. You're going to want to see and hear this, believe me.
I said what I said, which is that we do have, of course, a special relationship with our friends in the UK and also with some of our European allies, but we also know that there have been infringements on free speech that actually affect not just the British. Of course, what the British do in their own country is up to them, but also affect American technology companies and, by extension, American citizens.
We've had free speech for a very, very long time in the United Kingdom, and it will last for a very, very long time. Well, no, I mean, certainly we wouldn't want to reach across US citizens, and we don't, and that's absolutely right.
Across the UK, on DAB+, on your smart speaker, on your smart TV, and on your side. This is Talk.
Within the last few minutes, Volodymyr Zelensky has left the White House. Why? Because of an extraordinary row in the Oval Office a little bit earlier. This is what happened.
What kind of diplomacy, JD, you are speaking about? What do you mean?
I'm talking about the kind of diplomacy that's going to end the destruction of your country.
Yes, but if you
Mr. President, with respect, I think it's disrespectful for you to come into the Oval Office and try to litigate this in front of the American media. Right now, you guys are going around and forcing conscripts to the front lines because you have manpower problems. You should be thanking the President for trying to bring an end to this conflict.
Have you ever been to Ukraine? Did you say what problems we have?
I have been to.
Come once.
I've actually watched and seen the stories, and I know what happens is you bring them on a propaganda tour, Mr. President. Do you disagree that you've had problems bringing people into your military? And do you think that it's respectful to come to the Oval Office of the United States of America and attack the administration that is trying to prevent the destruction of your country?
A lot of questions. Let's start from the beginning.
Sure.
First of all, during the war, everybody has problems, even you, but you have nice ocean and don't feel now, but you will feel it in the future. God bless.
You don't know that.
God bless. God bless. You will not have a war.
Don't tell us what we're going to feel. We're trying to solve a problem. Don't tell us what we're going to feel.
I'm not telling you.
Because you're in no position to dictate that.
That's
Remember
exactly
this. You're in no position to dictate what we're going to feel. We're going to feel very good.
You will feel influence.
We're going to feel very good and very strong.
You will feel influence.
You're right now not in a very good position. You've allowed yourself to be in a very bad position, and he happens to be right about it.
From the very beginning of the war.
You're not in a good position. You don't have the cards right now. With us, you start having
I'm not
cards.
playing cards.
Right now, you don't.
You're
playing cards.
Mr. President.
You're playing cards.
Serious.
You're gambling with the lives of
war.
millions of people. You're
you
gambling with World War III. You're gambling with World War III. And what you're doing is very disrespectful to the country, this country. That's back to you. Far more than a lot of people said they should have.
Have you said thank you once? This entire meeting? No, in this entire meeting, have you said thank you? You went to Pennsylvania and campaigned for the opposition in October. Offer some words of appreciation for the United States of America and the president who's trying to save your country.
Please, you think that if you will speak very loudly about the war, you can...
He's not speaking loudly. He's not speaking loudly. Your country is in big trouble.
Can I
Wait a
answer?
minute. No. You've done a lot of talking. Your country is in big trouble.
I know.
You're not winning. You're not winning this. You have a damn good chance of coming out okay because of us.
Mr. President, we are staying in our country, staying strong from the very beginning of the war. We've been alone, and we are thankful. I said thanks
you haven't
in
been
this
alone.
cabinet,
You
and
haven't
not
been
only
alone.
in this cabinet.
We gave you, through this stupid president, $350 billion.
You voted
we gave
for
you
your
military equipment, and your men are brave, but they had to use our military.
What about
if you didn't have our military equipment,
you invited me
if you didn't have our military equipment, this war would have been over in 2 weeks.
In 3 days, I heard it from Putin. In 3 days. This is something
maybe
new.
Less.
In 2 weeks, of course, yes.
It's going to be a very hard thing to do business like this.
Again,
I tell you.
Just say thank you.
I said a lot of
accept that there are disagreements, and let's go litigate those disagreements rather than trying to fight it out in the American media when you're wrong. We know that you're wrong.
But you see, I think it's good for the American people to see what's going on over there. I think it's very important. That's why I kept this going so long. You have to be thankful. You don't have the cards.
Thankful.
You're buried there. Your people are dying. You're running low on soldiers. Listen, you're running low on soldiers. It would be a damn good thing. And then you tell us, I don't want a ceasefire. I don't want a ceasefire. I want to go, and I want this. Look. If you could get a ceasefire right now, I tell you, you take it so the bullets stop flying and your men stop getting killed.
Of course, we want to stop the war.
But you're saying you don't want a ceasefire.
But I said to you,
I want a ceasefire.
With guarantees.
Because you'll get a ceasefire faster than an agreement.
Ask our people about ceasefire, what they think.
That wasn't with me. That wasn't with me. That was with a guy named Biden, who was not a smart person. That was with Obama.
It was your president.
Excuse me. That was with Obama, who gave you sheets, and I gave you javelins.
Yes.
I gave you the javelins to take out all those tanks. Obama gave you sheets. In fact, the statement is Obama gave sheets and Trump gave javelins. You got to be more thankful, because let me tell you, you don't have the cards. With us, you have the cards. But without us, you don't have any cards.
One more question to Mr. Vice President. I'm sorry, here.
It's going to be a tough deal to make because the attitudes have to change.
What if Russia breaks ceasefire? What if Russia breaks peace talks? What do you do then? I understand that it's a heated conversation right now.
What are you saying?
She's asking, what if Russia breaks the ceasefire?
What if anything? What if a bomb drops on your head right now? Okay? What if they broke it? I don't know. They broke it with Biden because Biden, they didn't respect him. They didn't respect Obama. They respect me. Let me tell you, Putin went through a hell of a lot with me. He went through a phony witch hunt where they used him and Russia. Russia. You ever hear of that deal? That was a phony Hunter Biden, Joe Biden scam. Hillary Clinton, Shifty Adam Schiff. It was a Democrat scam. And he had to go through that. And he did go through it. We didn't end up in a war. And he went through it. He was accused of all that stuff. He had nothing to do with it. It came out of Hunter Biden's bathroom. It came out of Hunter Biden's bedroom. It was disgusting. And then they said, oh, the laptop from hell was made by Russia, the 51 agents. The whole thing was a scam, and he had to put up with that. He was being accused of all that stuff. All I can say is this. He might have broken deals with Obama and Bush, and he might have broken them with Biden. He did, maybe. Maybe he didn't. I don't know what happened. But he didn't break them with me. He wants to make a deal. I don't know if you can make a deal. The problem is I've empowered you to be a tough guy. And I don't think you'd be a tough guy without the United States. And your people are very brave. But you're either going to make a deal or we're out. And if we're out, you'll fight it out. I don't think it's going to be pretty, but you'll fight it out. But you don't have the cards. But once we sign that deal, you're in a much better position. But you're not acting at all thankful. And that's not a nice thing. I'll be honest, that's not a nice thing. All right, I think we've seen enough. What do you think? Huh? This is going to be great television, I will say that. All right, we'll see what we can do about putting it together.
Well, it certainly is great television, and I can't think of anybody who's put it better than Jason in the Lake District, who says, to paraphrase Kevin O'Sullivan, what just happened? I have never seen anything like that before in my 51 years. There are lots of people getting in touch, including one person who says, in regard to this, Zelensky has gone there as his arrogant self. The man should have kept his powder dry till in private. He's not a statesman, he's a comedian who expects people to do what he likes. At least the world sees what he's really like. Katie says, either this is a public row, it was a genuine huge misjudgment of diplomatic timing, or it wasn't. Sampo says, Trump and Vance don't get it, do they? The only winner here is Putin. David in London, just quickly, David, what would you like to say?
Very quick. First of all, the Americans, if they haven't watched it, you should watch a program called PB America channel twice this week. No wonder the Ukrainians hate Russia. Just watch PB America. I was spitting blood when I watched it. I don't know what planet Vance is on. Zelensky's thanked them. What's he got to go down on his knees? He's thanked the United States continuously. Also, I watched very carefully, you can probably hear I'm annoyed, I watched very carefully when Macron saw Trump earlier this week.
Yep.
Trump said about he'd loaned the money to the Ukraine, and he said, Macron quickly touched his arm or his leg, and he said, no, we didn't loan the money, we gave the money to Ukraine. I'd like to know, Peter, have us and the French, as far as I'm aware, we've given the money to Lorraine.
Yeah. Well, certainly there are varying interpretations of that, David, certainly, and from the Americans' perspective, they want some of it back. Katie puts it very well as well, just like Jason in the Lake District, and writes simply on Twitter, crikey. Dan says, the one thing we do know, Putin is laughing his head off. I absolutely respect Zelensky's bravery, but he has to call an election or quit. The slaughter on both sides needs to stop. Final one from Andy. He says, I thought Vance and Trump looked like bullies there. I'm a Trump supporter, but I'm ashamed of him there. They could have said what they said, but in a different way. Kevin O'Sullivan, what just happened?
Exactly right. What just happened, my show tonight will be delayed until tomorrow morning for technical reasons, because what the hell just happened in the White House? Unbelievable. Zelensky has stormed out. What that means for world peace, I'm not sure, but Those are the kind of scenes that are supposed to happen behind closed doors. I loved Donald Trump's conclusion. This will make great television. He's right about
he knows that side of things.
He's right about that.
He's absolutely right. So presumably dominating your programme over the next 3
well,
hours.
Of course. I mean, basically, we're going to try and squeeze in some other stuff as well. Pete Barnes will be with me. I think some other very, very good stories around. Lots of development on the